Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Judiciary Committee. My name is Wendy DeBoer. I represent Legislative District 10 in Northwest Omaha and serve as the Vice Chair of the Judiciary Committee. We'll start off by having members of the committee introduce themselves, starting on my right with Senator Ibach.
Good morning. I'm Teresa Iba, represent District 44, which is 8 counties in southwest Nebraska.
My name is Megan Kilty. I'm legal counsel. Angelina Pierre-Lewis, committee clerk.
Rick Holcroft, District 36, West and South Sarpy County.
Barry DK, District 40, represent Holt, Knox, Cedar, Antelope, northern part of Pierce, and most of Dixon County.
You will see other senators join us who may be in other committees right now, introducing other legislation or have other obligations of that sort. That doesn't reflect how they feel about the bill, but simply they have these other obligations. So also assisting our committee today is our page, Luke McDermott from Omaha, who is studying political science and economics at UNL, and Morgan Baird from Gering, who is a political science major at UNL. This morning we'll be hearing one bill, and therefore we will take it up in the order listed, which is the one bill. On the tables in the side of the room, you'll find blue testifier sheets. If you're planning to testify today, please fill out one and hand it to the pages when you come up. This will help us keep an accurate record of the hearing. If you do not wish to testify but would like to record your presence at the hearing, please fill out the gold sheet on the side of the room. Also, I would note the legislature's policy that all letters for the record must be received by the committee by noon the day prior to the hearing. Any handouts submitted by testifiers will also be included as part of the record as exhibits. We would ask if you have any handouts that you please bring 10 copies and give them to the pages. If you need additional copies, the pages will be able to help you provide them. Testimony for the bill will begin with the introducer's opening statement, and after the opening statement, we will hear from any supporters of the bill, then from those in opposition, followed by those speaking in a neutral capacity. The introducer of the bill will then be given the opportunity to make closing statements if they wish to do so. We ask that you begin your testimony. Please begin your testimony by giving us your first and last name and spelling it for the record. If not, I'm going to have to stop you and ask you to spell it. It's really awkward for me. So really for me, please just spell your name for the record. We'll be using a 3-minute light system today. When you begin your testimony, the light on the table will turn green. The yellow light is your 1-minute warning. And when the red light comes on, we'll ask you to wrap up your final thoughts. I'd also like to remind everyone at this time, including the senators, to please turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. With that, we'll begin today's hearing on LB 588. Welcome to the Judiciary Committee, Senator Wisher.
Thank you, Vice Chair DeBoer and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Anna Wishart, ANNA-WISHART, and I represent the 27th Legislative District in West Lincoln in southwestern Lancaster County. I'm here today to introduce LB 588, a bill that would establish the Medical Cannabis Act and provide for the cultivation, processing, and use of cannabis for medical purposes in Nebraska. About 6 years ago, my life was completely changed. I was knocking doors and came upon a woman who's a physician in Lincoln, and she spoke to me about her grandson who had debilitating epilepsy and had to move to a state outside of Nebraska to seek treatment with medical cannabis and a doctor. And that physician said that were it not for medical cannabis, they were looking at brain surgery for their 8-year-old grandson. Well, they moved states and he ended his seizures, and he became a happy and healthy little boy to this day. And I asked her, does your daughter and her family want to move back to Nebraska? And she said, absolutely. But here we would be treated like criminals. And so I remember going home that day and talking to my husband. He was a police officer at the time. And I said, I think I'm going to bring a bill on this. I know Senator Tommy Garrett did it 2 years before. Am I completely nuts in doing this? And he said, Anna, we hardly deal with issues when it comes to marijuana. We deal with alcohol, we deal with meth. But if this is going to help people's lives, this is something you need to do because you made a commitment to your district. So fast forward 7 years, and I sit before you, and a lot of the people behind me sit before you, having worked on this a lot longer than I have. We are multiple pieces of legislation under our belts, 2 ballot initiatives under our belts as well. And I sit before you with a piece of legislation that would be one of the most conservative medical cannabis laws in the country. Just this past year, our group completed our 2nd ballot initiative. And if I go back in time, these are 2 initiatives that we've worked on. The first, we collected over 190,000 signatures during a global pandemic. We had 1,000 volunteers, and personally, I drove across the state collecting signatures. This last ballot initiative, we collected over 180,000 signatures with 1/10 of the amount of funding that we received the last time. Both initiatives were kicked off based on legal challenges, unfortunately. But what I can say is that we had enough Nebraskans who signed these petitions to show that this is an issue that the entire state cares about. I've spent the past 6 years going across the state, meeting with people from all different counties, and you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who wouldn't benefit or know somebody who benefits from having access to medical cannabis. My research into the benefits are not just anecdotal. There is plenty of research that shows the benefits of medical cannabis. In 2017, the National Academies of Science released a landmark report that reviewed over 10,000 academic studies on the effects of cannabis. It found conclusive and substantial evidence that cannabis is effective for the treatment of chronic pain, nausea and vomiting, MS, improving sleep, reducing anxiety, PTSD, and traumatic brain injury. Most recently, research indicates evidence that medical cannabis is helpful in the treatment of epileptic seizures and autism. And we have experts who are following me who will be able to talk to this. And it shouldn't be surprising that there are medical benefits. Cannabis is over 10,000 years old. It's one of the oldest plants ever cultivated by human beings, and it's been used medically across the world for generations. In fact, it was used medically in the United States until the 1930s, and when Prohibition started, and Prohibition, it wasn't on the federal level, it was state by state. When Prohibition started, the National Medical Association at the time came out in opposition because it was a tool that they used to treat conditions. Over the 10,000 years that cannabis has been in humans' lives and cultivated, there has not been one case of a person fatally overdosing. And don't take my word for it. The Federal Drug Enforcement Agency confirms, I quote, "No deaths from overdose of marijuana have ever been reported." Compared to many prescription drugs, including opioid pain medication, which is now one of the leading causes of death in the United States, medical cannabis is far safer and far less addictive. Yet here we find ourselves today with an FDA that can expedite a COVID vaccine, but cannot take action on this plant-based medicine, even though all but 3 states, including Nebraska, have legalized some form of medical cannabis. Most of these states have legalized medical cannabis by ballot. from the voices of the people because elected leaders have failed to take action. And not one state that has moved forward on cannabis legalization has reversed their decision. So that brings me before you today. I'm asking for Nebraska's leaders to step up and pass a very safe, very regulated medical cannabis system in our state. I'm not going to go deep into the details of the bill, but I do have a summary that I would like to pass out to the committee. This bill does contain some changes from the previous legislation I introduced 2 years ago. Those, like Vice Chair DeBoer, will be very familiar with this legislation, though, because it includes the Judiciary Committee amendment, which specifically lists the qualifying medical conditions. This list of medical conditions is the result of countless hours of work that I did with the Nebraska Medical Association and paying expert doctors to sit down and walk through. And every single condition that you see in this legislation that is allowed, the NMA has said, yes, there is enough evidence to show that cannabis can provide some medical benefit, that they felt comfortable with that condition being on this list. Secondly, this bill also includes a compromise that I worked on with Senator Ben Hansen when this bill was on the floor of the legislature. It removes vaporization, so you are not allowed to smoke or vaporize cannabis in this legislation. It allows for inhalers, and then it also would put the medical cannabis system under the prescription drug monitoring program to better be able to utilize the benefits of that program in making sure that we are tracking who is utilizing the cannabis and making sure it's an effective program. And I also want to thank Chairman Hansen of the Health and Human Services Committee for co-sponsoring this legislation. If the committee is concerned that something is missing, I have shown over the years that I am willing to further narrow this bill as long as it remains patient-centered. My goal is that no family has to flee our state to get access to medical cannabis for themselves or a loved one. No human being should have to make a decision. No mom or dad should have to make a decision. Do I have to get brain surgery for my child, or can I try a plant-based medicine that has been effective in other states for people with similar conditions? This bill is not going to fail because of lack of compromise or thoughtfulness on the part of all of the senators and the stakeholders that have worked on this. If this bill fails, it will fail like it has in the past because of political pressure from a few people in our state who wield their power to stamp out the will of the people. And here's the thing. I know for a fact that the people in this room and the thousands of people who have signed the petitions are not going to be silenced. We will go back to the ballot if we fail to pass legislation this year, no doubt. And the thing is, we've learned now how to run a ballot initiative on 1/10 of the cost of a ballot initiative. And so we know that we'll be able to get this done. We've done it through a pandemic. We've done it with no money. And now we have time. And so I'm hoping that this legislature will think about the opportunity to pass a very, very safe, very conservative controlled system in the state to benefit the patients and Nebraskans. And thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Are there questions for Senator Wishart? Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Thank you, Senator Wishart. Just a couple questions, and thank you again for bringing this bill. When it says individuals cannot consume cannabis in the vehicle, even as a passenger, what does that mean?
It means that There will be no consumption, like you could not be utilizing cannabis while you're in a vehicle. So you would have to pull over and manage your prescription there.
So what if I take a gummy and go on a trip would that be a violation?
No, that would not be a violation. It's similar to our alcohol laws where you're not allowed to have an open container.
And then my other question on the license and regulation of producers or dispensaries, is there an equity component to that?
There isn't. Well, I am absolutely happy to work with you on that portion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Other questions? Senator Decay.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Morning, Senator Wishart. You mentioned in your presentation, your opening about not being FDA approved. Where are we at in trying to get medical cannabis FDA approved at that level? And what's the difference between medical marijuana now as a plant-based, as synthetic cannabis? I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but Epidiolex.
Yeah.
What's the difference between those two?
Yeah. So we do have a doctor who's following me who can give you much more details on that. But to answer your first question, the FDA system around this issue is absolutely broken. So there have been studies that have been completed on the effectiveness of cannabis that have been put before the FDA only to be stopped by the DEA from being able to move forward on that. And then this loop happens over and over again. It's absolutely a broken system. And so what's happened is states have just moved forward utilizing the 10th Amendment, our right, states' rights, have moved forward themselves in terms of creating a system. And I will say that in terms of the federal government, they have clearly over the years, under both Republican and Democratic administrations, not put any money towards enforcing or removing the rights of states to have medical cannabis systems in their state. In terms of Epidiolex, when you look at a whole plant of cannabis, it has a multitude of cannabinoids. You've probably heard of THC is one of them, but there are hundreds, and we're just starting to study, and some of actually the research that's coming out of Israel is some of the most cutting edge on just the benefits of multiple different cannabinoids on our endocannabinoid system, which is our internal system that regulates pain and mood. And so Epidiolex is one synthetic form, but we're finding that people benefit from having access to the whole plant. I mean, this is a plant that's evolved with us for 10,000 years. And so what we're finding is that for certain types of medical conditions, having access to that whole plant and working with farmers and working with doctors to find the right type of plant that supports somebody's medical condition is really what we're looking for here.
So with that, is that more of a, I don't want to say a broad spectrum drug, but is that more of a broad spectrum deal that will help alleviate the symptoms with the 16 that are proposed here? Or will that be more beneficial to one specific ailment that a patient might have?
All of the conditions that are listed are conditions for which access to the cannabis plant has shown evidence of having benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Decay. Other questions for Senator Wishart? Thank you, Senator Wishart. Will you be here to close?
Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to have a couple of invited testifiers to begin today. So we'll start with Krista Eggers. Welcome to your Judiciary Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair DeBoer. Good morning, committee members. My name is Krista Eggers, Cristaeggers, and I am here today on behalf of the many patients and families who have been advocating for medical cannabis for a decade now in this state. I'm also here to represent the 400,000 signatures that have been gathered across 2 different ballot initiatives. Finally, I am here today for my 8-year-old son, Colton, who I brought a picture of so you can look at him rather than me. Colton has intractable epilepsy, causing him to experience uncontrolled seizures, and whom I desperately want the option of medical cannabis for. Colton has been on 19 different medications and too many different drug combinations to count, all of which have failed to do anything for him except cause a long list of side effects. He has had 2 life-threatening allergic reactions, and sometimes I do not know whether it is worse that he experiences the seizures or the side effects from these drugs and what it does to him. I feel a common misconception is that FDA medications approved are safe and without risk. However, under the direction of his doctor, a team of doctors, we have tried medicines that are known to cause liver failure, stroke, suicidal behavior, and even a drug which was determined to deteriorate brain development in rats. All of the medication he's currently on today are being used off-label, regards to his dosage, age, and weight. 5 years ago, while working with a team of physicians at the Mayo Clinic, we were told that medical cannabis could potentially save Colton's life. In the next breath, we were told that they were unable to talk to us about this treatment option because we didn't live in a legal state. They advised us to move or work to legalize it here in Nebraska. I chose the latter. After multiple failed legislative attempts, a ballot initiative was launched in 2020, gathering almost 200,000 signatures in the midst of a pandemic. And we were forced to do it again in 2022, and this time we lacked major funding. With the support of the patients and families, many of whom are behind me today, I took on the role of running a statewide petition drive. I lacked any experience and relied solely on passion and drive. My dining room table became an office covered with stacks of petitions and county maps, alongside Legos and art projects. At night, I worked at Colton's bedside, cautiously waiting for the next seizure that would undoubtedly come. Every 90 minutes throughout the night, my alarm goes off, waking up just enough to put my hand on Colton's chest and make sure his body is warm and that he's still breathing. It was in these moments alone, I was reminded that we could not stop fighting. And this is exactly why I'm here today. I sit before you, tired and weary from this fight. And I beg you to look upon the suffering people of this state with compassion and empathy by supporting this bill. Most all of us in this room today will someday be faced with a life-threatening diagnosis, a decline in their own health or a loved one, maybe a terminal illness. Won't you be thankful that there were people who didn't give up, wouldn't stop fighting, and that could be the reason that you have an option for treatment someday. Thank you. I will yield to any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Eggers. Are there questions for this testifier? Ms. Eggers, thank you for bringing your presentation about your son. How's he doing today?
He's good. He's good.
Good. And have you tried some of these synthetics that Senator DeKay was talking about? And are they successful in helping Colton?
So Colton recently started Epidiolex, which you heard mentioned, and I know will be other testifiers will be going over what that drug is. And for Colton, it has not been highly beneficial. He's actually had some not favorable side effects from it, but we are using that along with a bunch of other medications.
Okay. And you'll get back, I suppose, on working on a proposal of, I can't say that, a ballot initiative. If we don't get our job done here?
Yes. If we do not pass this legislation this session. If this body does not come to a realization that this is something that's so desperately needed in our state, and this is the way to do it and to regulate it and keep the patients who are the most vulnerable and most sick in our state, to allow this as an option to them. You are looking at a mother who has vowed to my child, to the children who have parents here today, to the patients of this state, to those 400,000 people who have signed a petition once and then twice, that I will not give up, and this group of individuals behind me supporting this today will not give up. And we will go to the ballot in 2024, a presidential election year, and we will have something that the people will enact. And I don't know what comes next, but you have my word that we won't stop till this is a realization and something that can benefit the patients in this state.
Thank you so much for coming to testify before us today.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Next is Amanda McKinney.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Amanda McKinney, AMA, NDA, MCKINNEY. I'm a practicing triple board certified physician. I have authored journal articles and textbook chapters on medical cannabis, and I currently teach a medical cannabis for health professionals certificate program through Bellevue University. I'm here to testify in favor of LB 588 for 3 reasons. Number 1, medical cannabis is effective, and so that you might expand your knowledge base on that, I've provided a couple of the many peer-reviewed articles demonstrating its effectiveness for some of the conditions that are covered in LB 588. Secondly, medical cannabis is safe. There have never been any reported overdose deaths from cannabis use, while there are over 10,000 deaths annually from 17 FDA-approved drugs that are often used when cannabis could be used instead. The level of safety with medical cannabis is actually unparalleled in modern Western medicine. Additionally, we're all aware of the over 107,000 opioid deaths that occurred in 2021 in this country. And in states where medical cannabis is utilized for pain management, opioid deaths have been reduced. Of note, alcohol abuse disorders also decrease in states where cannabis has been legalized. And according to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, alcohol use disorders are a significant problem in the state of Nebraska. In order for patients to realize the safety and efficacy of medical cannabis, we need a regulatory framework for medical cannabis that is prescribed by physicians who are educated on the subject. Currently in Nebraska, individuals can access CBD and other hemp-derived products, including Delta-8, Delta-9, and Delta-10 THC, among others. However, physicians and other healthcare providers have zero education on the endocannabinoid system with which the plant interacts, as well as the plant constituents and their pharmacological activity within the body. As a result, people seeking help from cannabis for their medical conditions are unable to access accurate information regarding what type of cannabis product they need, how to use it, how much to take, and when to take it. Additionally, the hemp industry is completely unregulated. While there are efficacious and safe products available, there are also products that are contaminated with solvents, pesticides, and other harmful substances. It's extremely challenging for an average layperson to discern from the good from the bad. It's long past time for Nebraska to have a medical cannabis infrastructure in place. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Are there questions for this testifier? Senator Takei.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. I'm not real educated on this. So the difference between CBD and THC, can medical marijuana, or can it be effective with just the increased levels of CBD rather than, or where does both of those fit into the treatment regimen?
Right. That's a great question. And so the thing about, and one of the papers that I provided for you kind of elaborates on that. When we talk about the cannabis plant, or any plant for that matter, the sum is often greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So in other words, everyone knows that an apple is good for you. But why is that apple good for you? Is it because it has vitamin C or fiber, or what is it? Well, the answer is it's because all of those things are in there together in one package and they work synergistically in the body, okay? The same is true of the same is true of the cannabis plant. There are hundreds of cannabinoids and also terpenes and other constituents within the plant itself. So Epidiolex, the drug Epidiolex, is what we call a CBD isolate. So it's just CBD isolated alone in the medication. And what we're finding is that patients that require or that are using Epidiolex for their seizure disorders, they require anywhere from 2 to 50 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Okay, that causes problems with the liver and other things because you have to use such high doses. When you use whole plant cannabis, and so an extract that's got some THC and those other cannabinoids and the terpenes in there, you can lower the doses. The effective dose can be as low as 0.02 milligrams per kilogram. Okay, so that's a threefold, 3 magnitudes of order of magnitude difference. So those chemical components work synergistically together. THC is not a bogeyman. I understand that the reason that it has been the bogeyman in the past is because it does interact with the CB1 receptor in the brain, which does cause some euphoria. It makes people feel good. However, it does not, it's got therapeutic use as well. It's really important because when you add that little bit of THC and those other cannabinoids to the CBD, it makes it much more effective and you can use it at much lower doses.
With the THC, that is the part of the drug that provides what I would say the high.
That's correct.
When it comes to operating vehicles, equipment, stuff like that, does that impair the operator's judgment? Or that's what I'm trying to see what the side effects of the THC would be that would impair somebody or else be able to use a drug with the CBD that wouldn't be as, more impaired driving conditions.
So the other thing that happens with, so when people use recreational marijuana or adult use, it's typically very high levels of THC with very low to minimal levels of CBD in whatever cannabis plant they're typically smoking or the edible that's been prepared. But what CBD, so the interesting thing about CBD and THC is when you add them together. So if you've got a product like a tincture that's maybe a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD. CBD acts as something called a positive allosteric modulator, or a negative allosteric modulator at the receptor. So CBD will actually interact with the receptor that the THC interacts with, but it changes the shape just enough of that receptor after the CBD attaches to it that it actually displaces some of the THC. So in cases where, so what it does is it has the effect of dampening the psychotropic effect that you see with the THC itself. So even if there's a higher level of THC in the product, if there are high levels of CBD in there as well, you tend not to get that same type of high that you're thinking of. So medical cannabis patients aren't just walking around stoned all the time, right? So oftentimes they are completely safe to drive because they're not impaired, right? They're not out. It's the same as if you were, certainly if you've been out using recreational cannabis, you should not get behind the wheel of a car, nor should you do so after drinking alcohol. But the way we use medical cannabis is very different in those circumstances.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Senator Takei. Other questions from the committee? I have a couple for you. With medical cannabis, are there concerns about addiction?
So addiction, there's a difference between addiction and dependence as we see it, right? So the lifetime dependence risk of cannabis is about 9%. Alcohol is around 14%, cocaine is about 17%, opioids are 23%, nicotine is 32%. So of all of the sort of, drugs that we kind of think about, cannabis has the least risk of long-term dependence. People can become sort of psychologically addicted to cannabis, but there's no real physical addiction in that sense. Because if a patient were using a heavy user of cannabis and then they decided that they needed to stop for whatever reason because they were becoming dependent upon it, and they stopped taking it, there's very little withdrawal symptoms. It's typically very similar to if you were trying to withdraw from caffeine. So sometimes some nausea, some headaches, generalized irritability, maybe don't sleep so well. So very similar to caffeine. Whereas if you have somebody who's dependent on alcohol or dependent on opioids and they withdraw from that, alcohol withdrawal is oftentimes life-threatening. They have to be hospitalized and given benzodiazepines so that they don't die. And the same is true with opioid disorder withdrawal. It's typically not life-threatening, but it can be, but it's very, very uncomfortable for the patients.
Thank you for that. What were those numbers again? You said what percentage?
Cannabis is 9, alcohol is 14, cocaine is 17, opioids 23%, and nicotine 32.
Okay. So one of the things that I have heard in these hearings, I've heard these hearings a few times now, and one of the things that I've heard in these hearings is a discussion about something like the gateway effect. Can you speak to the gateway effect that might happen from marijuana?
Yes. So the gateway theory to drug abuse has been largely debunked. And I do have an article here that I can have copied that I can share with you that talks about that. What we know is that they've done large survey studies where they've looked at cannabis use globally. And cannabis is probably the most common drug used globally for a variety of reasons. And while almost all hard drug users have used cannabis, most people who use cannabis do not become hard drug users. It's about a 1.7%. 1.7% of people who use cannabis end up going on to harder drugs. And what we've discovered from looking at this issue is that it's really an issue of a person's personal propensity to use for substance use. There are people who are just genetically and socially hardwired to end up having drug issues, harder drug issues like that.
Is there any evidence that sort of absent marijuana, they wouldn't go on to a different drug?
No, there isn't. And actually, in states where, as I alluded to earlier, in states where cannabis has been legalized, adult use cannabis has been legalized, we actually see people using less alcohol. And we actually see that teenage use actually declines in states where recreational cannabis has been passed, because then an institutional or a regulatory framework gets put in place. And so it ends up, the drug dealers can't access these, kids can't access cannabis through drug dealers or other drugs through drug dealers as easily when you have a regulatory framework in place. So we've seen that in all of the states where they have recreational use, that the actually young people, adolescents, have a decline in use of cannabis.
So that sort of, last question, I promise. That sort of brings me to another thing that I've heard. Maybe you're not the right person to ask this to, but I'll go ahead and try. You were sort of talking about that there is a lesser ability for teenagers to get involved in other things. We hear about a black market when there's a regulatory structure that I've heard in this room that actually increases the black market. Are you someone who can speak to that issue of whether or not the black market increases? Is there evidence one way or another on that?
I can't speak to that directly, although what I can say is sort of what I alluded to earlier, that in this large survey analysis that they did and published, is that all I can say is that in states where cannabis has been legalized, they've seen that teenage adolescent use has declined.
Okay.
But I can't speak anything beyond that.
Yeah. All right, Senator Decay.
Going back to the CBD and the THC, can medical marijuana be produced and with just the CBD? I know you said it works in conjunction with each other. Could it have beneficial effects without the THC in it? And I guess with the THC part of it, is there any long-term effects with continued use of it, or what is there side effects, or where are we at with that?
Right. So to answer your first question, there are strains of cannabis. So each of these different strains of cannabis that are grown, they're hybridized. Different plants are crossed to get different characteristics and traits. And there are different classes of cannabis. So there's sort of the fully kind of the more medical grade versus, and then it kind of goes to the moderate and then the more recreational type. And those recreational types have higher level, they've bred to have higher levels of THC in them. Where we have medical grade cannabis that has much higher levels of CBD and CBG in them.
What is CBG?
It's just another cannabinoid that's been shown to have really valuable medicinal properties. The terpenes, the oils, the things that give them the characteristic smells, those also change with strain use. So yes, we do have, and oftentimes for certain conditions, you use higher dose CBD components for daytime use, and then use higher THC products for bedtime use because of the benefits that it provides for sleep. As far as what happens with long-term use, with chronic heavy users, which is defined as more than 10 joints a day for over 20 years, those individuals that have heavy use like that can develop some memory loss. However, when they stop using, the memory loss reverses. That's pretty much the only negative side effect for long-term use. There's been no associated increased risk of cancer. Even in patients who are individuals who smoke cannabis, there is no increased risk of lung cancer unless they also smoke tobacco cigarettes. So it's, again, like I said, the safety of cannabis is actually unparalleled. I mean, I can't say that almost about any other drug that we use that's FDA approved in medicine today.
Well, going off of what Senator DeBoer asked, that's, with the THC, that's where my question is, if you could develop a drug that would have less THC in it and more CBD and be close or as effective without that, it might eliminate the attractiveness through the black market to, try to acquire that drug. That's where I'm trying to figure out things on that part of it.
Yeah, and I know that we're all products of our culture and the way we were raised, and I know that people are scared of THC. They're scared of of cannabis in general. But I'd like to reassure you that this is, even for people, and I'm not talking about adolescents. Adolescents shouldn't be using alcohol or cannabis or anything else. But when we talk about using cannabis, it is a much safer alternative for people than alcohol. But we don't bat an eye at people, going to the bar every day, and having some drinks after work. That's just almost seen as normal in our culture. And we look at cannabis as though it's some kind of, devil lettuce, right? But that's ultimately not the reality. It's about undoing some of these cultural stigmata that have been placed in our brain about it. But I understand your concerns. But I would just like to alleviate your fears that it's not as bad or dangerous as you might have been, led to believe at one point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kay. Senator Ibach.
Thank you. Senator, thank you very much for your testimony today. Can you speak to because I'm looking at the fiscal note and trying to digest all the financial end of it. Can you speak to the production of cannabis, where it's grown, how it is packaged, maybe some of that piece, just to give us a background on where it's grown, how it's processed, and what kind of regulations we would have?
Right. So where it's grown depends on what the different states that have decided that they're going to have medical cannabis or cannabis in general, they did get to decide on who grows it and where it comes from and how it's grown and those kinds of things. Oklahoma just passed their medical cannabis law or their cannabis use laws, and they required that that the cannabis be grown in Oklahoma so that they can benefit from that industry. It's grown typically, medical cannabis in particular is typically grown indoors. Depending on the grower, they may be using different methods, but it can also be grown outdoors as well. As far as how it's processed, we actually have a hemp processing facility right here in Nebraska. We have probably more than one. But the way that they extract the CBD oils from the hemp here is it's a cold water extraction, so they don't use any solvents in there. So that's a really positive attribute of it. And then, it's pretty much sometimes extra oil is added to it to make sure that it meets the proper levels of THC based on the law. But it just depends on what the product is that they're making. But there's different types of extraction methods as well. And there's different growing methods as well. But I'm not sure that answered your question, but.
No, it helps. I just want to make sure there's no risk of abuse from the production side of it. I know that it's regulated. I know there are rules and regulations that will follow it, but that would be a concern that
What type of abuse?
just from the grower's perspective, because I know it's regulated and I know it would be monitored.
Right.
But I would just want to make sure that there were no ramifications from the grower's perspective.
Right. And the growers, it's important that, especially for medical cannabis use, that it be, grown without pesticides, grown without other chemicals that could then make especially a medical cannabis user sick.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Ibach. Other questions for this testifier? I don't see any. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And next, Jim Wilson. Welcome, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning, Vice Chairman and members of the Judiciary Committee. I am Jim Wilson. I am a professor in the College of Medicine at UNMC, associate professor in the College of Pharmacy at UNMC. I'm also a member of a clinic here in Lincoln, evaluating medications as a volunteer for some time. I'm also a fourth generation rancher up at Polk County, Nebraska, south of O'Neill. And so I have some interest in some of these products with our farmers and ranchers and opportunities for them too, just kind of on the side. I'm actually a member of the Nebraska Farmers Association, and I'm chairman of the work group on medical cannabis. Our group was not put together to decide to be a proponent or opponent of this bill. Our group was merely formed to protect the residents of the state of Nebraska. Medical cannabis is not a drug. It cannot be listed as a drug. It's a Schedule I federal compound. And so it's a complex, like we've heard this morning, of over 200 compounds. Our group includes a lot of people, 30 members across the state, from retail, hospital, colleges of pharmacy, industry, all kinds of people, to see what we need to help give information and take care of people with the understanding that this bill would come to pass, or a bill like it come to pass. So I formed it to get ahead of the surge of the bill, so get our pharmacists ready. And it's been a very interesting bunch of people. It's really, really good deal. In this complex plant known as cannabis, again, there's 200 compounds to it. And there seems to be a lot of things that happen with it. For instance, heat makes some of the components more active. So when they vape it or smoke it, things happen like THC. THC goes up in some areas. We also wanted to evaluate the number of drug interactions that it may have with other compounds that the person may be on, regular prescription medications, because there's a whole host of drug interactions that can happen with this, just like CBD. And CBD got away from us in this state. You can buy CBD oil at Joe's Bait Shop or any other place all across the state, ranging from olive oil in some bottles to pretty good stuff in some pharmacies that I've been to. So I'm very concerned still with that. I didn't want this happening with this particular compound. We also identified.
Sir, you've got the red light, so I'll ask you 2 sentences to finish up.
Okay. So I'd like to thank Senator Weissert for mandating that pharmacists would be involved with this bill. We have a person on the with the drug monitoring program. We'll speak here later. That's on there. 2 pharmacists on the board of cannabis, and a mandatory pharmacist available to people receiving medical cannabis at our different dispensaries. So I really thank her, and I'll answer any questions this time.
Thank you, Senator Ibach, or Senator Decay.
Oh, let's go. No,
Go ahead.
I don't know.
Senator Decay.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Mr. Wilson, being a part of the pharmacy group, I'm sure I probably know the answer to this. FDA approved. Would you like to see this be an FDA approved drug, and what steps? And I know that we talked earlier about the circles of getting it FDA approved. What could be done going forward to make it an FDA approved drug in a expedited timeline, and so that it is approved and the dosage could be regulated more than it is right now with this particular drug going forward?
Great question. There's a couple of steps. First of all, Jim Wilson's dream, my dream, that this be an approved drug in the pharmacy, under the control of a pharmacist, being available to dispense the drug and have lots of time to discuss it with the patients or the children of the patients. Secondly, that's not to be. It will take the federal government, I believe, and Kevin Borcher will be able to talk more about this when he comes up, but we need approval on a federal level. Right now, it'd be illegal for me to dispense marijuana in a drugstore if I work there. So it's got to start there. And they have not moved on this or even talked about it in years. So I'm not sure. It's got to start there. Our pharmacists got to have directions from the federal government through the FDA that this is closer-up, okay? You can dispense closer-up. I do that all the time. You can do blood work on closer-up, and you can monitor side effects on closer-up, and follow the patient, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. That's what we need to do with this drug, because it is really needed, at least in 5 disease states that we know of, that's solidly got literature to support its use. And I know I batted kind of around the bush a little bit with you.
The drug, and like I say,
No, you're doing fine.
I'm gonna mispronounce it, but Epidiolex.
Yes.
Why is that approved and why is a medical cannabis approved? Is it because it's a synthetic or what's the difference?
It's not synthetic, it's a derivative of the plant called cannabis sativa. So we have some very sharp chemists in the United States. And so they're able to isolate that compound out, do some studies on it, produce data to the FDA that it's an effective drug, it does what it's supposed to do. And you regulate through 4 phases of study, the side effects and effectiveness. And after that's all blessed, they approve it as a drug to be dispensed or to be prescribed and then hence dispensed by any pharmacist in the United States. Medical cannabis is not a drug, it's this complex. They don't know what to do with it. It's got lots of activities. And the Israelis are really on top of this. They have some studies going on some of the isomers that are just fantastic work. So we're really at the top of the edge of what this complex can do. It's kind of like going back to the first cancer drugs. They didn't know what they're doing in the 70s very much, and all of a sudden, some trickle down, and by golly, we can eradicate cancer and childhood leukemia now.
So if I gathered right from you, this is not being pursued by FDA because it's a compound and rather than a derivative.
May I get a nod from Kevin? Is it being batted around some? It is. Any progress?
All right.
Okay.
We'll have other testifiers to ask
No
questions.
progress on that. It's got to start there. It's got to give a safety label and give our pharmacists some direction to dispense this.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for this testifier? I don't see any.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Next, I have Marcia Muting. Did I say right?
Good morning, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Marcia, M-A-R-C-I-A, and my last name is Muting, M-U-E-T-I-N-G. I submit my testimony as the CEO and a registered lobbyist for the Nebraska Pharmacists Association. We are in support of LB 588. The Nebraska Pharmacists Association represents pharmacists, interns, and pharmacy technicians in all areas of practice of Nebraska. The results of a survey of our members showed that most pharmacists, interns, and technicians support the use of medical cannabis. Our members feel that if cannabis is to be used for medical purposes in Nebraska, then the drug experts, the pharmacists, need to be involved. Thanks to Senator Wishart for requiring that a pharmacist be employed by each dispensary. As noted before, cannabis is a complex combination of many chemicals, and because of that, it can cause, in the studies that we've seen, many different drug interactions with prescription medications. A complete review of the patient's medications by a pharmacist when cannabis is provided is essential for patient safety. With the opportunity to address a few technical concerns with Senator Wishart, the NPA would respectfully request that the committee advance LB 588 for further consideration by the full legislature. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Are there questions from the committee? So I'll ask you a couple. I think maybe this is getting a little confused in my mind. So when we're talking about federal drug scheduling, the marijuana is listed as a class 1. What are some other things within the class 1?
Heroin.
Heroin? Okay.
I think we actually, there'll be a bill later today where we're adding a lot of street drugs as class 1.
Okay. And then when you get to like class 2, what do you have in there?
Sure, that would be prescription medications like morphine,
Okay.
oxycodone, hydrocodone, Ritalin, methylphenidate.
Are opioids somewhere in that?
There are opioids in Schedule 2.
Okay. And so what's the difference between having something classified as a class 1 and having something classified as a class 2, 3, whatever?
Sure. So there's an inverse relationship. Class 1 drugs have the highest potential for abuse and the least medicinal use. Okay? So a class 2 would have more medicinal use and a lower potential for abuse, and so on and so forth. We have classes 1 through 5 in the United States.
And does marijuana seem to fit with the other drugs in class 1?
I don't know how it got there. And to answer the question about research, I just saw an article last week where I believe that the federal government is going to loosen up some of the requirements for research on medical cannabis. So that is a good sign. I think what's limited research on cannabis is, and I don't pretend to be a researcher, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through to actually obtain drug to do the research from the federal government. So I understand that some of those restrictions are going to be loosened up, and hopefully we'll have more studies, more important studies. And I did want to maybe help clarify something about Epidiolex. Epidiolex is cannabidiol, CBD, one of the components in marijuana. You've heard lots of people say that. Epidiolex was only studied in 2 very specific types of seizures in kids. It wasn't studied in all epileptic patients. It wasn't studied for pain. It wasn't studied for depression. All of the things that we actually have studies for in the use of medical marijuana. So I hope that maybe that helps.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Looks like Senator Kay has a question for you.
Just one. And I apologize because I know it's been told to me and I can't remember right off the top of my head, but as a pharmacy group, if a patient is prescribed marijuana, medical marijuana, where would they pick that up? Would a pharmacy be handling that, or where would they get that, and who would be regulating that for them?
Sure. So right now today, our barrier is with the federal law. And it is kind of interesting, to be honest with you, that so many states, I think we're one of 6 states that hasn't passed any law to allow medical cannabis. So many states have reclassified this drug as a C2 or other class, allowing it to be prescribed and provided. We're at Marsha's Perfect Pharmacy, which doesn't exist. At Marsha's Perfect Pharmacy, I have a registration with the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. They are the federal agency that oversees controlled substances. That federal agency will not allow a pharmacy, my registration would not allow me to carry and provide a C1 drug. Okay, so can a pharmacy, Marsha's Perfect Pharmacy, Walgreens, Costco, whatever, can they provide medical marijuana? No, not unless there's some changes at the federal level. They would probably shut down Marsha's Perfect Pharmacy if I tried to combine it with my regular prescription practice. So where will the medications come from? You know, according to the bill, I see that there's designated for 3 dispensaries in Nebraska. I don't love the word dispensary, but I don't know what else you call it. And it's important to know that a practitioner can recommend medical marijuana. They can't prescribe it because prescribe is a special word that means something very special. And pharmacists can't dispense it because dispensing is a special word that means something special. But it can be recommended by a medical professional and then provided in consultation with the pharmacist.
So does a medical doctor or anybody have any say on regulating or how much and how big the dosage is to each patient going forward? How's that overseen?
I would have to review the bill again because we've had so many different iterations. Oftentimes, the order from the prescriber only notes what the indication is that would be on our list of approved indications. And then that order, prescription, piece of paper, hopefully electronic, order would be submitted to the dispensary. I don't know if there's a standard, Senator Wishart, for the amount that is dispensed. I know that there's bills about the legal limits of the possession of medical marijuana, and it's included in this bill. But it wouldn't be unlimited.
So who would the order come from? Would that come from a doctor or who?
Right. A prescriber has to evaluate the patient to assure that they are eligible for therapy under the law. And then that order would be transmitted to the dispensary, and then the patient would be treated there.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Decay. Other questions? I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Let's have next Amy Marasco.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Amy Marasco, AMYMARASCO. I have a Master of Science in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, and I'm a National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach working directly with medical cannabis patients. I am here today representing Americans for Safe Access, the largest national nonprofit group helping to ensure safe and legal access to cannabis for therapeutic use and research. Most of all, I'm here to represent patients who are not seeking cannabis to get high, but rather who are seeking much-needed relief from a multitude of medical conditions. I'm asking this committee to vote in favor of passing LB 588 so that your Nebraska constituents have the safe and legal access to the medicine they need. Cannabis has been used as medicine for thousands of years. It has a superior safety profile compared to many FDA-approved pharmaceuticals, including an inability to cause death by overdose. It can't do it. There's a large and growing body of evidence supporting the safe and efficacious use of medical cannabis. In October, President Biden called for a review of the Schedule I status of cannabis. And in December, he passed the Medical Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Act, effectively eliminating many of the barriers of research that we've experienced in the past. The rescheduling of cannabis is coming, and in preparation, states need to have sound patient programs in place. Cannabis is also an individualized medicine. It's important that patients in your state have access to different forms of cannabis so they can find what actually works best for their system. We've talked a lot today about the different formulations and how cannabinoids interact with each other. The endocannabinoid system is complex, and cannabis formulations have been shown to be more effective when one or more naturally occurring compounds are used in combination. For example, Epidiolex, as noted by Dr. McKinney, is an FDA-approved CBD-only medication, and it requires very high doses, whereas clinicians have seen comparable results and fewer adverse effects when it is combined with some THC. Currently, there are over 6 million legal medical cannabis patients across the country, and Nebraska is one of only 2 states that does not provide any patient access. These patients are not nameless, faceless people. They are our parents, our grandparents, our children, our colleagues, and our revered veterans. They deserve the same access to medical cannabis options as patients have in the states that surround Nebraska. LB 588 is the first step to helping Nebraska patients safely and legally gain this much-needed access. I urge you to support this bill, and thank you for acting in the best interest of Nebraska patients.
Thank you so much. Are there questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Thank you so much. Dominic Gillen, I believe, is the next person we have listed.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Dominic Gillen, DOMINIC-GILLEN, and I'm here to speak in favor of LB 588. My son, Will, has been at the forefront of this fight for medicinal cannabis. My wife, Shelley, and Shirley Lawler are two of the moms who really spearheaded the start of this movement to allow Nebraskans the right to have cannabis in the toolbox of their doctors. That was 10 long years ago. Over those 10 years, we've worked on many pieces of legislation, from Tommy Garrett's LB 643 to the current LB 588 introduced by Senator Wishart. We've also worked on 2 petition drives, both of which, I might add, by sheer numbers of signatures, have proven that Nebraskans want this option. We've testified and told Will's story so many times that I've lost count. I thought I'd do it a little differently this time. We have every faith in the world that Will, although he can't talk, is cognitively aware. That's one of the reasons we fight so hard for this issue. That's to find the key to unlock Will's ability to communicate with us in a more typical way. We believe that cannabis holds the key to that communication piece, as well as some respite from the hundreds of seizures that he suffers from each and every day. If you pay close attention to Will, who's sitting behind me, you're likely to see him having seizures. Some are subtle, some are more obvious. If Will could give his own testimony, this is what I think he might say. And this is hard for me. Senators, why do you think so little of me that you can't find some compromise to give me hope for a more normal life? You often talk about the youth of Nebraska and how you want to protect them. What about me? I'm part of that youth. Unfortunately, I don't seem to get the same level of concern. In fact, some of our leaders don't consider me, Will Gillen, to be even part of the greater good. Fact is, the youth who want to use recreational are already doing it. The common sense youth of Nebraska, like my brother and sister, ask, why aren't the adults in this state helping me? Did you know that my parents have to follow me around at home because they're afraid I'm going to fall from a seizure? Unfortunately, my seizures often happen when my parents aren't nearby, and I go crashing into the ground or the wall or a door, just like a tree literally falling in the forest. I can hear them running and praying along the way that I'm not bloody again from the injuries that I get. I know my family suffers from PTSD as a result of my falls and the trauma that causes me and them. Imagine just for a minute what a lacerated liver feels like and the surgery that goes along with repairing it. I almost died from that one. Or when I fell at school last February and broke my jaw in 3 places. Not to mention the countless stitches, the broken bones, the concussions, and other more minor injuries that I've suffered. Seizures have taken so much from my family and me. Consider this. My dad prays for me every day, asking God to let this be the day that the miracle happens, that the seizures stop. Or the times that he comes into my room and cries over me at night when he just thinks I'm asleep. This is my life, and I'm begging you to help. Will Gillen. As you can tell, Will has gone through more than anyone should ever have to. And you know that he never complains. He is without a doubt the strongest person I've ever known. He has touched countless lives with his strength and perseverance without ever having spoken one single word. Please help Will and the countless other Nebraskans begging for you for help. Google Will Gillen if you want, if you have some time, and to see more about his life. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony and for sharing Will's story with us. Are there any questions for this testifier? I don't see any. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Nicole Hochstein, sorry.
Good morning, Vice Chair DeBoer and committee members. My name is Nicole Hochstein, NICOLEHOCHSTEIN. Warren Buffett once said, being American is merely an accident of birth, the result of winning the ovarian lottery. I'm grateful to have been born an American and honored to have married a man brave enough to fight for this country in the United States Air Force. I have won the lottery in so many ways when looking at my life, but my son cannot say the same. My son, Jayan, was born in Nebraska. I used to think giving my children the best life by being in this state. When my husband's military career took us out of Nebraska, I left kicking and screaming. I love the small town I grew up in, the two-finger wave you get when driving, the community feel and helpfulness of neighbors and strangers. Midwest values are something I missed horribly when living away. After retirement, we wanted our kids to have these things surrounding them again. We moved back to the state they have always called home. However, this state is taking my son's life. Had he been born in any other state, he would have access to a life-saving medicine. Jane was diagnosed with infantile spasms, a catastrophic form of epilepsy, when he was 4 months old. In 2015, he underwent a brain resection where 4 parts of his brain were removed. He was confined to the hospital for 30 days away from his siblings, extended family, friends, and loved ones. In 2019, he had a VNS, a pacemaker-like device, implanted under his chest wall to shock his brain every 30 seconds. This past summer, Jayan underwent another brain surgery to split the 2 hemispheres of his brain. He continues to seize daily. He has jumped through every hoop. Our family has spent countless hours talking to doctors, legislators, law enforcement, patients, and experts to find the help he needs. We have petitioned our government multiple times but have been unsuccessful due solely to the financial burden. Our family is left with minimal options. There's nothing left for Jayan medically in Nebraska. We are back to trying previously failed medications. Our family is having to discuss staying in our home state. We may have to take our kids away from their grandparents and cousins again to save our middle son's life. The state would lose a 20-year retired veteran with top secret clearance and experience managing 1,200 people and $19 billion in assets, as well as a highly sought after special education teacher. Leaving the state would also mean that we wouldn't come back, even as a visit, as federal regulations don't allow products to be moved across state lines. We could never step foot in Nebraska again. There are current Nebraska doctors seeing patients in Iowa taking this medication, showing great success. 37 states have approved comprehensive, publicly available medical cannabis programs. 11 states allow the use of low THC CBD products.
Sorry, I need
That's
to,
okay.
I
Thank
need
you.
to stop you there.
I would be honored to answer any questions that you have.
Are there any questions? Senator Duque.
Ms. Holstein, you were going to finish up. Go ahead and finish up.
That means that there is some cannabis legislation in 48 states in the United States. Why do we not feel that as Nebraskans, we can do this safely? We are smart enough to create laws, to regulate, and to help the suffering and vulnerable. We can be the Nebraska I know for all my children, not just the ones without special needs. Thank you, Senator Duque.
Are there other questions? I don't see any. Thank you so much for being here. Before I call the next testifier, I do just want to make one note. The legislature does have a policy about no props. So I'm sorry to say that also includes pictures. So I'm going to ask, although we love seeing your children, not to have pictures in the hearing. Next, we have Sherry Lawler.
Good morning. Thank you, committee members. My name is Sherry Lawler. It's SHARILAWLOR. And I'm here as another mother with a child with epilepsy. My daughter Brooke, who's with me today, has had epilepsy since she was 15 months old. She just turned 30 last month. And we just, want a better quality of life for her because, of course, she is one of the children, like Senator Wishart talked about, that we only have a brain surgery, choice left. There's no other medicines. We even tried, like 15 of them, including Epidiolex. And Epidiolex did help clear her head because she said that she could feel that there wasn't as much activity in her head. However, it made her so sick to her stomach she couldn't eat, and she would just lay in bed, curled up, cramping. So we had to stop. And there's something that the doctors have reported that several patients are like that. There's something that they mix with it that it makes it allergic. But then, synthetic, well, even though it's not a synthetic, there's just some things that have never worked for her. So, we went through like 9 hospitals in 5 different states searching for treatments and done anything from like the implant surgery Nicole was talking about, diets, ketogenic diets, low glycemic, vitamin therapy, acupuncture, and, failed over 15 FDA approved pharmaceuticals. She currently takes 3 anti-seizure meds, which is 405 pills a month. 405 pills a month, which equals to $4,500 per year. And several of those pharmaceuticals come with the FDA black box warning about the increase in suicide, aplastic anemia, peripheral vision loss, adverse reproduction effects, headaches, fatigue, depression, learning disabilities, developmental delays, liver, kidney damage, tremors, dizziness, and nausea. She has experienced 9 of the 16 I just talked about. For her safety, she wears a helmet or sits in a wheelchair to protect herself from injury. She has drop seizures. So again, like Dominic, she drops like a tree in the forest and you're trying to run to get her and it doesn't always happen. So she's had about 50 staples in the back of her head, stitches here, mouth surgeries. So like I said before, the last resort is a corpus callosotomy, which is severing the connections of her left and right hemisphere. And then after that, a right frontal lobectomy. What parents want to do this? To start cutting up their child's brain. There's no guarantees for success. And some that we've known that have gone the surgical route, it's not always a success. And they deal with other deficits later on. It's just a gut-wrenching decision that we as parents, this is what we're left with. And, just caring for chronically ill persons, it affects your entire family and their quality of life too.
Thank you so much for sharing your story about Brooke. Let's see if there are any questions.
Okay.
Are there any questions for this testifier? Thank you so much for being here. Heather, are we up to Heather Barnard? Bernard. Didn't have my reading glasses on, sorry.
Good morning. My name is Heather Bernard, Heather Bernard. I'm the new executive director for the Epilepsy Foundation of Nebraska, a licensed clinical social worker, and a licensed independent mental health provider. There are approximately 19,600 Nebraskans living with epilepsy and seizure disorder. I come before the committee today in support of LB 588, Medical Cannabis Act. The Epilepsy Foundation is the leading national voluntary health organization that speaks on behalf of approximately 3.4 million Americans with epilepsy and seizures. Epilepsy is a disease or disorder of the brain which causes reoccurring seizures. It is a spectrum disease comprised of many diagnoses, including an ever-growing number of rare epilepsies. There are many different types of seizures and varying levels of seizure control. Epilepsy is the 4th most common neurological disorder in the U.S. and affects people of all ages throughout their lifespan. Approximately 1 in 26 people will develop epilepsy at some point in their lifetime. About 1 in 10 people will have a seizure at some point in their lifespan. LB 588 would ensure patient access to medical cannabis products from state licensed dispensaries. The Epilepsy Foundation is committed to supporting physician-directed care, to exploring and advocating for all potential treatment options for epilepsy, including cannabidiol oil and medical cannabis. There is no one-size-fits-all treatment for epilepsy, and about 1/3 of people living with epilepsy suffer from uncontrolled or intractable seizures, with many more living with significant side effects despite available treatments. If a patient and their healthcare professionals feel that the potential benefits of medical cannabis for uncontrolled epilepsies outweigh the risk, then families need to have that legal option. Currently, the medical use of cannabis is legal per state law in a majority of the states. In these states, a number of people living with epilepsy report beneficial effects, including a decrease of seizure activity when using cannabis strain rich in I totally lost it, sorry. The state can play a critical role in ensuring that access to medical cannabis is safe and reliable. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Is there anyone, Senator McKinney?
Thank you, Vice Chair DeBoer, and thank you for your testimony. What do you say to the people that will come up and say there is no benefits to legalizing medical cannabis?
I'm trying to think how I would nicely say that. No, just kidding. In all seriousness, my previous career was a medical social worker in the hospital, and there's just so many options that don't work now. I don't understand why we wouldn't try something that has been proven in other states with success.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Other questions for this testifier? Senator DeKay.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. You said there's no one size fits all. So when patient goes to a doctor or is seen by a doctor, and it comes to medical cannabis, how will the doctor know if this has a potential to work, or is this a tried and true method in other states, or is this try and see what happens approach? And then with that, the dosage, is that regulated, by weight, or how's that regulated, so we know if it is going to work, if it does work, how much to give them to make it the most optimum to work for them within those conditions?
I'm not a medical professional. I have no insight to how physicians prescribe. I can tell you from my experience working in 2 different neurology clinics, pediatrics, that even a FDA-approved drug is not tried and true. They prescribe it, and it may or may not work. It may or may not work by itself. It may or may not work with a group of other drugs. So I don't understand or see how this would be any different than what is already prescribed or FDA approved in that setting. It's the doctor's knowledge and understanding, epileptologists that have studied seizures and what works, what the seizures look like, when they happen, all of those things that they take into consideration before prescribing a drug.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeKay. Other questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Next, Willie Dove is on the list.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Willie Dove. That's spelled W-I-L-L-I-E and not Y. Dove, D-O-V-E. I'm a former Kansas State representative, serving 8 years as a conservative Republican for the 38th district there. I'm also a veteran. The challenge we have before you today will affect, as you know, many individuals who will never have the opportunity to come before you and speak. Instead, we have mothers and fathers that have been coming to you for many, many years and getting this bill passed, LB 588. When I first introduced this industrial hemp bill to Kansas, and I use it as a reference, many of my colleagues said that I would never get reelected. However, that was not true because I served for 6 more years. After listening to many researchers and the benefits of medical cannabis, it became clear and very apparent this is not a partisan issue. Parents and seniors are faced with daily challenges of doing the best for their families. Allow me to tell you of a concerned neighbor of which I witnessed the success of medical cannabis. The child of 8 years old, a granddaughter, a daughter, has suffered from seizures, in fact, 30 to 45 seizures a day. After using a controlled substance of medical cannabis, the child had less seizures. However, she did have occasional seizures of less than 4 to 5 a day, and sometimes none. We as Americans will do anything we can to protect our families. I've related stories of success of many persons in this area that need passage of LB 588. I'm urging you to pass this legislation that will allow the use of medical marijuana for all ages. It'll give protection to hardworking Americans who just want the best for their families and assurance that the justice system will not penalize them for using it for the protection of their families here in America. Our senior citizens also, we owe that debt of gratitude to allow them to do the same. Excuse me. One of the things that I've seen here rather, and done some research is between 1926 and 1936, 8 major cases were brought before the state courts about the marijuana and the use of it. The decisions rendered in this case were very noteworthy. In fact, typically the judgment ruled mythology or opinion rather than scientific evidence. When we hear and look at the argument of illegal drugs, there must be some comparative study done. There is none. If so, where is it? More violence is absorbed by the use of alcohol than medical marijuana. It is harder to quit cigarettes than heroin. However, we look at this marijuana as something that's going to cause a severe problem.
Sir, I'm afraid your red light is on. Let's see if
That's why I'm stopping.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are you styled as member, representative? How do we address you?
Willie Dove, please.
Okay, Mr. Dove, let's see if there are any questions for you. Senator McKinney has one.
Thank you. And you kind of was hitting at a point that I think should be brought up in this conversation about cannabis. The prohibition of cannabis in the United States was largely led by racism and xenophobia. It wasn't outlawed because people deemed it as a horrible drug that'd kill our kids. It was framed in a manner based around racism, xenophobia, and fear, and individuals trying to protect themselves financially. And I think that's important to note. What do you say to the people that are going to come up and say, if we legalize medical cannabis, it's going to destroy our kids, it's going to make our state bad, and all these things that always pop up year after year?
Senator, thank you for that question. It's a very good question. In fact, if I had more time, I could elaborate more, but I'll try and be as quick as possible. In the 1800s, illegal drugs were being used by individuals who were tax-paying, who were voters, and their case was never taken up because it wasn't something that the individual benefactors who were in the legislature, I'll say, wanted to take up, because those were voters. Those were white people that they did not want to cause a problem. Well, I'm saying, as a conservative Republican, let's get away from that. Our Democratic cohorts have done that. They have shared the same concerns that we have for our children. And it shouldn't be this issue of, because I can do this, I can get away with it. Well, this is something that has caused a big, big problem. What I'm pointing out is the law is proportionally to disadvantaged persons when the subject is up for discussion.
And last question, do you think states should wait for the federal government to get their act right?
You got a great question there, Senator. I don't think the federal government is going to do it because there are more dollars in this area keeping it just the way it is. But there is something good about that. States should be given the opportunity to do what's good for their states. We are autonomous Union, and the United States was born that way, and I hope it stays that way because states need that autonomy to do what is necessary for their constituents.
Thank you, and I'm glad you pointed out that the continued prohibition of cannabis or marijuana is largely driven by financial concerns from big corporations and not really based in real fact. Thank
Ditto,
you.
Senator. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Other questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr. Dove.
Thank you, Senator.
Kevin Borscher is the last on my list.
Good morning, Vice Chair DeBoer, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Kevin Borcher, Kevinborcher. I'm testifying in a supportive capacity today on LB 588. I'm testifying here today not as the Nebraska Prescription Drug Monitoring Program Director at SyncHealth, but as a pharmacist and a citizen of Nebraska. My comments today are those of my own and are not necessarily reflective of my employer. When I served on the Nebraska Board of Pharmacy, we were directed in statute to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. During my tenure serving on the board, we were asked twice to review whether medical marijuana should be allowed in our state. At that time, I was not supportive of the measure because evidence and research was lacking 15 years ago, and I voted with my head and not my heart. Plus, the Board of Pharmacy doesn't have the authority to reschedule marijuana. In that 15 to 20 year time span, a lot has changed. The vast majority of states have addressed the issue of allowing cannabis to be legalized for medical purposes or even recreational use. Scientific research has progressed to show that cannabis can be beneficial in some patients for some medical conditions, and not always as a first-line treatment, though. This does not mean that cannabis is a panacea for everything, for everyone. As a pharmacist, the benefits of including our profession in this bill are significant to help patient safety. As a pharmacist, I can use my skills and training to help identify potential interactions, which can cause either an increase or decrease in the effectiveness of the cannabis or other drugs, and provide patient safety. There are some changes to the language in the bill that would need to be made to clarify the intent and prevent some unintended consequences. I thank you for allowing me to speak with you today. 10 years ago, I couldn't see myself supporting the use of cannabis. Much has changed across the nation and in Nebraska since then, as more and better information has emerged. Because of this, I am once again using my head and not my heart in changing my position of LB 588, and would be very willing to meet with Senator Wishart on any amendments. This is a very emotional issue, and I think taking the evidence, the scientific research is important. With that, I urge you to support LB 588 with amendments, and I'd be willing to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions? Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator Board. Quick question. What do you suggest to opponents to do to get to a space to where you started and where you're at today?
Very good question, Senator. So I would say, look at the evidence. Numbers can be changed. Numbers can be reported in different ways. And looking at the totality of the information, looking at the benefits versus the risks, there are more benefits for support and engagement of using medical marijuana, not for everyone and not for every condition, but for those that scientific research has shown provides a benefit.
Thank you.
Other questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Thank you for being here. Oh, Senator Kay.
You just mentioned that. With that, would there be any benefit to, say, doing a pilot program with a specific group of patients to make sure to see how it is working, to see what the benefits are and how it is regulated and dispensed? Or what's your thoughts on that?
So some of that does occur now with Epidiolex, for instance. There are, and I believe Marshall Muting earlier mentioned, there are Jim Wilson mentioned, there are 4 phases of drug studies. And so phase 4 is the post-marketing phase, where they will look at adverse events, effectiveness of that drug after it's been already shown to be proven safe and effective. Are there any other consequences, just like with any other drugs? And I think that would be very beneficial to get more information.
And would that open the door or opportunity for patients of a certain ailment to be able to use it in a pilot program as an experimental deal to gather the data going forward to see what the benefits outweigh the?
Yeah, there are some requirements for research with universities using an investigational research board, working with the FDA to get approval to use a Schedule I drug such as heroin, LSD, or cannabis. But all of that could be done, and I think it should be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for this testifier? I do not see any. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
I want to now just do a little housekeeping for a second. Can I have first, and keep them up there, a raise of hands of folks who would like to testify in support, just for a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, can you put your hands down for a second? Now can I see opposition? 2. Okay, hands down for a second. Neutral? 2. Okay, we can probably, what? Go to opponents and then come back? Okay, we're going to go to opponents next, and then we'll come back to proponents if we have time at the end. We do have to be done by 1:30 in order to go to our next hearings that start at that time. So we're gonna move to opponents, and then we'll come back. Welcome, Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you, Vice Chair DeBoer.
I didn't hear what you said.
Good morning, good morning, Chairman Wayne, Vice Chair DeBoer, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Mike Hilgers, M-I-K-E-H-I-L-G-E-R-S. I used to serve in the 107th Legislature with many of you. I served as Speaker most recently. Today I'm here in my capacity as Attorney General of the state of Nebraska, and I am testifying in opposition to LB 588. I think Senator McKinney's question, I would slightly modify it, and really goes to the core of my testimony here this morning, Senator McKinney, which is not whether this body should wait for the federal government to act. It's whether or not this body can wait for the federal government or not wait for the federal government to act before it acts. So I have 3 points I'd like to make this morning. Number one relates to the constitutionality of LB 588 or any other bill that would purport to allow for the sale or use of a Schedule I drug in the state of Nebraska. I'm passing along an opinion from my office relating to LB 110 that was issued a couple years ago relating to a similar bill. At the end of the day, this bill, in our view, is unconstitutional for the following reason. The Constitution says that when a federal and state law are in conflict, it's under the Supremacy Clause, state laws are void. In this case, Congress has acted, and I'm a very limited government conservative, but under Article 1, Section 8, the people have given Congress a limited set of powers. Among those are the right to regulate interstate commerce. Congress has used that right. It's undisputed under the Controlled Substances Act in 1970. It has made, whether we agree or don't agree, it has made marijuana Schedule I drug. That means that it cannot be sold or used for any purpose. Because of that, any bill in Nebraska or otherwise that purports to allow the use of marijuana or any other Schedule I drug would put us in conflict with the Controlled Substances Act and would therefore be unconstitutional. That's the first point I would like to make. The second is, how long is it 3 minutes, Vice Chair?
Yes, 3.
Second point briefly is you may ask, well, what about other states? Other states are doing this. And at the end of the day, that is a dereliction of the duty of the federal government. Congress, to the extent this is an issue, Congress should act, but certainly law enforcement officers absolutely should enforce the law. We have a federal government in the Department of Justice that has refused, in my opinion, to enforce its obligation and responsibilities. This legislative body should expect its attorney general to enforce the laws that you pass, regardless of my policy preferences and regardless of whether I approve of those policies or not. It's my responsibility to enforce the law. Similarly, Congress has said that marijuana, whether we like it or not, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. The Department of Justice should have enforced its law rather than creating what is now a regulatory patchwork that allows various states to act in conflict with federal law. I know I'm almost out of time. I will finish my third point. Oh.
Go ahead and finish, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My third point relates to the last two articles I sent. I've listened to all the testimony this morning. I know there were some medical professionals here. There's a lot of data. There is some data on this issue. And my third point is relating to this particular body. I think approving of an actual medicine or drug, I think, is unprecedented in this body. We have never asked, and this is based on my historical research, so it could be incorrect. But as far as I could tell, this body's never been asked to approve any other kind of drug, whether it's cholesterol medication, obesity medication, cancer drugs, or the like. And I think in part because as great as this body is and as many of the things that we can tackle, we have places where we have the expertise in the process to enable medical experts to weigh the evidence, to be able to understand to what degree we should prescribe certain medications and where they might be in conflict. That is through the FDA and similar processes. And the two articles that I provided to you is one, a recent study in 2021 from Stanford, not a right-leaning set of professors who actually measured some of the impact on marijuana on epileptic seizures, actually found some benefit, but found also some downside. And if I could quote from the first page of the Stanford Medicine that I provided you, and I'll wrap up, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the extra time. It did describe the positivity, but it did say, but there's a dark side from this use. A similarly rapid breakdown of 2-AG after its release, the researchers found trips off a cascade of biochemical reactions culminating in a blood vessel constriction in the brain and, in turn, disorientation and amnesia that typically follows such a seizure. In addition, I provided from this week an article relating to the impact of increased cannabis use on anesthesia. The reasons I provide these to you is not to weigh in on whether or not those studies are accurate or to what degree they're valuable or whether you should actually agree with them. I don't know if I agree with them. The point is that this is an evolving area of research that requires medical professionals in the proper process to be able to understand and approve, and that is through the FDA and similar processes. The last thing, if I might, Mr. Chair, I meant to say at the beginning, I have a great amount of respect for Senator Wishart. It would be much easier to come in support of a bill for a friend, and I have a great deal of empathy for the individuals who are here this morning and who have testified in support of this particular bill, and my heart goes out to them and their families, and I appreciate them spending time this morning on this bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator McCain.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Thank you, Attorney General Hildreth. So if this passes, and you said you would still try to enforce those laws, how do you think that would play out in court?
If LB 588 were to pass, and I in my office were to attempt to enforce LB 588, how would that play out?
No, if you try to enforce the current laws against the prohibition of cannabis or marijuana.
So if so if I understand your hypothetical, if in other words, there's prohibition, someone was using or possessing and contrary to law, LB 588 had not passed, how would that play out in court?
If it passes, how would your office, because you said that you would still try to enforce the laws because the federal law trumps the state law. So how would that work in practice? So
in general, I think I have an obligation. My office has an obligation to enforce constitutional laws. There's an open question. Well, in our view, it's not an open question whether LB 588 is constitutional. We don't think it is. It would put us in direct conflict with federal law, Senator McKinney. Federal law says it's a crime. So that's a difficult question for us to answer.
How are other states across the country balancing that?
based on what I know, which is anecdotal, Senator McKinney, so it's not a comprehensive analysis. States are not enforcing, federal government is not enforcing federal law, and the states are not enforcing federal law either, and they're following their state laws. So they're not arresting. In states that have permissive laws on this topic, they are not enforcing or arresting people.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney.
Any other questions? Senator DeBoer.
I almost called you Senator Hilders. I'm so sorry. I'm just used to that. Attorney General Hilders. Did we pass a right to try bill? I believe we passed a right to try bill for terminally ill patients. So if we did that and those patients can try medical marijuana, how does that fit within your schema of the competing federal and state laws?
That's a great question. I appreciate you asking that, Vice Chair DeBoer. It's easier to say Vice Chair DeBoer than Senator DeBoer. Two things on that. One is I opposed that bill on the floor of the legislature for the exact same reasons. And I was in a significant minority. I think it was about 45-4. But I did oppose it for the exact reason that I'm articulating today. The reason why the people are able to utilize the right to try is not because of the state law. It's because actually the federal law did implement a right to try at the federal level, which is precisely what should happen here. To the extent that we're analyzing the efficacy of these drugs and the permissibility of these drugs, it ought to happen at the federal level. And if that were to happen, the state would follow, or our office certainly, we would follow whatever happens in the federal law. But to be clear, the right to try in Nebraska, there was no preemption problem because at the federal level, they allowed the right to try.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next opponent. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Chairman Wayne, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Colonel John Bolduc, Johnbolduc, Superintendent of the Nebraska State Patrol. On behalf of the State Patrol, I'm here today in opposition to LB 588, which would legalize the use of cannabis in various forms for medicinal purposes. Despite best efforts by states to regulate the medical marijuana industry, a 2018 study found that 3/4 of legally produced marijuana was diverted to the black market. When I was a police chief in California, which was a medical marijuana only state from 1998 until 2018, I routinely saw the diversion of medical marijuana products to the black market there. Because of the demand and potential profit, decriminalizing the possession and distribution of even medical marijuana contributes to the dangerous problem the black market poses to public safety. Troopers also see this diversion regularly as they have removed numerous loads of marijuana and marijuana products traveling through Nebraska that were packaged and labeled as a legal product in their state of origin. From 2016 to 2020, the weight of THC products seized increased by over 1,200%, and 70% of all drugs seized in Nebraska came from two states, California and Colorado. Legalizing the sale and use of marijuana, medical or otherwise, has also resulted in an increase in traffic deaths. Even during Colorado's medical marijuana only era, traffic deaths where drivers tested positive for marijuana increased from 7.85% in 2008 to 16.53% in 2012. Unintentional exposure to marijuana products in Colorado have also skyrocketed from 8 in 2008 to 179 in 2021. This bill also creates a conflict with the Concealed Handgun Permit Act and the Firearms Purchase Permit Act. Federal law prohibits medical marijuana users from possessing or buying firearms and ammunition, even if the state allows the drug's use. If enacted, this bill prohibits the patrol from reporting a classification of prohibited persons under federal firearms laws, which would be a habitual user of Schedule I controlled substance, to not only the federal government, but also to local law enforcement agencies such as sheriff's offices, which issue firearms purchase permits. These agencies rely on information obtained from various sources to ensure that individuals who are prohibited by federal or state law from obtaining a firearm are properly identified. In addition, we expect the partial legalization of marijuana will increase the burden on the Nebraska State Patrol Crime Lab due to the increase in availability of black market marijuana and marijuana products, which will require testing for criminal prosecutions across the state. The Crime Lab will also be responsible for verifying that cannabis products meet the legal threshold obtained, outlined in the bill and do not contain more than 2,000 milligrams of THC. Finally, the crime lab may be asked to determine THC quantitation to ensure it is not hemp when an amount other than the allowable amount of marijuana is located. I see my time is up. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Any questions from the committee? Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. And thank you for your testimony. Are you aware of a recent case that ruled that a law prohibiting marijuana users from possessing firearms is unconstitutional?
I'm aware of that case, Senator. Thank you.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, I haven't read the details of that case, but I know that that could have implications on federal laws that address this issue. And again, we have a network of laws across the different states that are trying to comply with the federal firearms laws. So since that was a district court decision, it's probably going to work its way through the appellate process. And however that
And
outcome.
the Supreme Court has signaled that with the gun laws, at least they want to stick to historical precedent pretty much. And so my other question is, do you think that the black market is continuing to exist because we have Colorado, then we have Nebraska, no. Then we have somebody else, no. They got Illinois, yes. And that patchwork of states, either legal or not legal, is still keeping the black market. And do you think that if I don't think you ever could get rid of the black market completely, but do you think it would decrease substantially if states were legal across the board?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The black market exists because there is a demand for high potency THC. And as long as that demand is there, the black market is going to step up to fill that need.
But what if, and then goes to my question, if it's legal, medical or whatever, would the black market still exist? If you still are able to purchase you said high potency THC.
Again, Senator, because it's such a high profit margin industry, what we're seeing in states where it is legal, we're seeing the black market undercut the legal market by taking shortcuts, by producing it in mass quantities, importing it from other countries. So I don't know that that's going to change. That's a hypothetical. But what we've seen in legal states is the black market products are cheaper.
It's cheaper because they could come here and sell it for a higher price. And what I'm saying is, if we were to legalize it, you pretty much cut their profits down because it's legal, and you have to go to a regular.
That's it. Senator, again, thanks for the clarification. I think where we see the difference in price, in whether it's a legal state or illegal state, obviously in an illegal state, it's all black market, right? But what we're seeing is the grow operations are cutting corners. They're growing it very fast, high levels of potency. The quality control is not the same as it is with the dispensaries where they're buying products from legal grow operations where there's health and safety standards being enforced and those type of things. It would be nice to think that the market would equalize if that were the case, but that hasn't proven to be true in other states at this point.
And I guess, and we don't got to go back and forth on this, you could argue it's a policy decision to keep the black market the way it is. How is your office working to prevent drugs from leaving your facilities now after the situation that happened last year?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Because that particular case hasn't been adjudicated yet, I think it would be improper for me to comment on that. My understanding is that we hope that that'll be wrapped up very soon on the criminal prosecution, but I can assure you that we have implemented several steps since that time, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you or anybody else at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next opponent. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Maggie Ballard, MAGGIE-BALLARD, and I'm here on behalf of Heartland Family Service in opposition to LB 588. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, as I have done several times since researching this topic beginning in 2014. Our stance at Heartland remains that unless medicinal cannabis goes through the FDA process, like it has for something like Epidiolex, it's not good for our clients. And we are therefore in opposition of this bill. We feel that we're putting the cart ahead of the horse here, and our most vulnerable Nebraskans, like children that get targeted oftentimes by the products like edibles and those types of things, they might end up paying the price for it. We do want to recognize, however, that if our opposition and the opposition of some of the other people here today was to not pan out, if it was ignored and Nebraska was to implement a medicinal cannabis program, we believe Senator Wishart has done a thorough job of including many components that would make it function with fewer opportunities for abuse than some of the other medicinal marijuana bills in the past and medicinal marijuana programs in other states. So for instance, I was relieved to see that mental health problems like PTSD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, problems like that were not listed in the qualifying conditions. I was relieved to see that a healthcare practitioner must conduct an evaluation of the patient and collect the patient's relevant clinical history, particularly around schizophrenia. Another issue, though, we've seen, because Heartland, we're located in both Iowa and Nebraska. So I work in both Iowa and Nebraska. And what we've seen in Minnesota and in Iowa, where they've collected data, the largest amount of THC reported to help any condition in their records has been 30 milligrams per day, which would be 2.7 grams in a 90-day period. And this bill doesn't specify a limit on milligrams of THC per day. It just says the allowable amount of cannabis means up to 2,000 milligrams per product, but not a limit on like how many 200 milligram products a person can have. I can tell you what other pieces of this bill would work well and what improvements should be made. But the fact remains that despite some of the testimony here today, federal medical, major medical associations and a lot of medical experts around the country are in opposition to medical cannabis because it has not been proven to be effective more than a placebo. So that's not to say people don't get relief from their symptoms, but it hasn't been proven against a placebo. Also, unlike with other medicine, if I were to unlike with medicinal marijuana, I wouldn't have to pass a background check to get my medicine from a pharmacy. I wouldn't be able to vape it or eat it like a piece of candy or things like that. Oh, and I see my light has turned off.
Thank you.
One more paragraph I ask you to read on your own time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Senator McKinney.
Thank you. And thank you for your testimony. Has Heartland Family Services, either in the state of Nebraska or Iowa, supported or worked with other senators to ban alcohol?
We haven't, I think that would be a pretty losing battle, but we have definitely testified in opposition to some of the expansion of alcohol bills.
So would you support a prohibition of alcohol?
I personally, as unpopular as that would be, absolutely.
With Heartland Family Services?
Probably.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee?
I'm nothing but consistent.
Thank you for being here today. Next, opposition testimony. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Dr. Roger Donovic, ROGERDONOVICK. I am the Executive Medical Officer within the Department of Health and Human Services, and I am a board-certified psychiatrist. I'm here to testify in opposition to LB 588, which proposes to adopt the Medicinal Cannabis Act and permit certain patients to engage in the medicinal use of cannabis. Legalizing marijuana for any purpose, including medicinal use, poses risk to the health and safety of Nebraska residents. At this time, marijuana is not approved by the Food and Drug Administration for any medical uses and is classified by the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration as a Schedule I controlled substance. Substances in Schedule I are listed as highly addictive and have no currently accepted medical uses. The FDA has approved 4 cannabis-derived or cannabis-related drug products. Each of these drugs have gone through the investigational new drug, IND, process through the FDA Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Included with these drugs are the active ingredients, the amount in each dose, the purpose of the product, the use of the product, specific health and safety warnings, dosage instructions, and the product's inactive ingredients. This level of information is lacking for other marijuana products due to the lack of conclusive research and approved uses. While the FDA is continuing to consider how to support more scientific rigor in the study of the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes, the research has yet to yield conclusive results. Without this rigorous study, the true side effects or even the true benefits of cannabis cannot fully be known and understood. None of the benefits from cannabis have proven to treat the underlying diseases listed as qualifying medical conditions identified in LB 588, but rather treat a small spectrum of the symptoms related to nausea, muscle relaxation, and appetite stimulation, among others. If the aim is to protect the health and safety of Nebraska patients, more research is needed to fully understand the medicinal uses and the negative risks of marijuana and all the cannabinoids contained therein. If studies find medicinal uses for marijuana, the FDA processes for investigational new drugs, IND, are there to ensure the safety and efficacy of those products. In summary, other than the 4 cannabis-derived or cannabis-related drug products approved by the FDA, marijuana remains listed as a Schedule I on the Drug Enforcement Administration's schedule of controlled substances with no approved uses. Without proper vetting by the FDA for safety and efficacy of marijuana products, the health and safety of Nebraskans is at risk. We respectfully request that the Judiciary Committee not advance this legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Thank you for your testimony. In your testimony, at the end of one of the paragraphs, you said it's highly likely there are currently no accepted medical use for cannabis. Have you done your research on that?
I've reviewed the position statements from the AMA, the American Psychiatric Association, and other reports.
Have you attempted to do research?
I have done research in the field of addiction, yes.
And what did you find in your research that you did review?
I have not specifically run clinical trials with cannabis, but I can tell you how drugs are brought to the market. They undergo double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized clinical trials to demonstrate efficacy and safety in the treatment of diseases. And there have been there's not enough evidence at this point for cannabis.
But you're saying there's not enough evidence, but you're also saying there's no medical use. And my reason for asking these questions is that a lot of times people from departments come up and say things that are either true or not true, but you guys haven't done your own research to basically have a factual foundation in that. And what I'm saying is if you're going to come up and say there's currently no medical uses for cannabis, I hope that you would do your own research to figure that out and not say I refuse something or this or that, or the hypothetical of, oh, this might happen. These tests should happen. And thank you.
So let me clarify. So when I talk about research, I'm talking about randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trials that have been published in peer-reviewed journals. That to me is research. Looking at the internet and reviewing what's on the internet is not research.
No, I'm saying I would ask that the Department of Health and Human Services figure out a way to
run
do
clinical
some
trials.
research.
That's not a function of the Department of Health and Human Services.
then why is it a function of the Department of Health and Human Services to say whether something is or is not
Because
good for medical?
we review the current scientific evidence for things like cannabis and make statements and regarding public health risks.
So is alcohol worse than cannabis?
Alcohol is a different drug.
Is it worse?
I'm not prepared to testify about alcohol today. It's a different drug. It has different effects on the body.
From your experience, since you've read peer-reviewed journals and reviews from your peers, has it been found that alcohol is worse than cannabis?
It's worse in some ways. It's not as bad in other ways.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. How many other opponents do we have? Opponents. Okay, 2. All right. Next opponent. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Wayne and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Laurel Muting, Lorelle. Last name Mueting. And I'm here on behalf of myself today. And I just want to offer you a perspective from a Nebraska citizen who is not in favor of medical marijuana. I think we hear all the time that every Nebraska citizen is in favor of medical marijuana. And I just want to offer a different perspective, as I am not. I am opposed to LB 588 for many, many reasons. I have many concerns with this bill. One of the first reasons it's problematic is that it circumvents the FDA process on the safety and efficacy of substances we call medicine. Secondly, there are numerous problems in other states who have legalized marijuana for medical purposes, including increasing child accidental ingestion, increasing potency and purity, increases in crime, marijuana addiction. According to the DSM-5, marijuana is not only psychologically addictive, but physically addictive as well. Increases in school dropout rates, and the list goes on. I would urge you to vote no on this bill to protect the health and safety of all Nebraskans. Thank you for your time today.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next opponent. Welcome back to your judiciary.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne, members of the Judiciary. My name is Patrick Condon, Patrick-Condon. I'm the Lancaster County Attorney, and I'm here in that capacity as Lancaster County Attorney and testifying in opposition to this bill. The 588, the County Attorneys Association is also in opposition of this bill. I believe we sent a letter in regards to that, to this bill, but I'm here just in my capacity as Lancaster County Attorney. In listening to the testimony this morning, I think Senator DeKay kind of hit things on the head here, and that is, and again, it was echoed by Attorney General Hilgers, and that is we are asking this legislature to do something that is never done, and that is approve a drug for use. And as Senator DeKay pointed out, there are many aspects of getting a drug to market that are necessary. There are testings to go through. We heard our past testifiers talk about the blind, double-blind tests, things of that nature that are important for these to go through, these drugs to go through to determine the efficacy and the integrity of these drugs. So I think that is important. I think it is something that we've never asked a body like this to do. So I think it is important that we ask, why are we doing this? We have over the last 14 years, I believe was the testimony, they have attempted to get this legalized. And the question is why hasn't that attention been put on taking this drug off of the Schedule I assignment and allow the research to proceed in the federal system or in the federal body and other bodies to determine the efficacies of these drugs. Secondly, I've heard that this drug has never led to an overdose. That may be true, but I believe there are plenty of articles. And personally, I have witnessed individuals who have taken the drug, taken marijuana, and it has led to attempts of suicide because of paranoia that they have had because of taking the drug. Also, I kind of wonder, are we talking about cannabis indica or cannabis sativa. I mean, are there differences between these? I've been told there are. Senator McKinney, I have not done the research, but again, I have read articles in regards to this and talked to individuals involved in the study of marijuana and hemp. Senator McKinney, and lastly, you previously suggested that prosecutors do not have empathy for individuals. I have empathy for the young man sitting behind me. I have empathy for the individuals of the young children that we've seen in the photos here earlier today. But I also have empathy, sir, for the family of a young man who was killed when an individual turned in front of that young man who was riding a motorcycle and killed that young man being under the influence of marijuana. I have empathy for two families who had their children taken because the individual driving the car did not properly take into account the distance to stop because he was under the influence of marijuana. So I do have empathy for these individuals, Senator McKinney.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions, Senator McKinney?
Do you have empathy for victims of motor vehicle homicide because of alcohol?
Absolutely.
So do you come in here and oppose, do you support bills to ban the usage or consumption of alcohol?
I haven't had the opportunity to see a bill like that,
So if a
Senator,
bill
and I
came
don't know
forward
that.
with the county, would you come in and support a bill banning the usage of alcohol because you have sympathy for the victims?
I would like to see what the bill says, Senator.
If it banned the usage, prohibited the usage of alcohol?
From the damage that I have seen to victims, I would be in support of that.
You would? All right, thank you.
Any other questions? I know that Attorney General Hildreth and you both referenced that we're asking this legislature to do something that, don't we have Schedule I drugs listed in our statutes?
Such as, you mean like cocaine?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think cocaine is not a Schedule I drug. I'm trying to think of any Schedule I drug that we have that has been, because generally Schedule I drug is one that does not have any efficacy in the medical field.
But we approve and disapprove what drugs are illegal and versus legal every year, don't we? I mean, that's part of what we do. Because there is a section of 29, whatever code.
29,
The 20, but is
416, the controlled substance.
Yeah. So that's,
yes.
So we do approve and disapprove drugs. I mean, that's our job.
Approve and disapprove of drugs of which are illegal. Is that what you're? Yes.
Yes. So it is something that this body does.
But this body, yes. To answer your question, Senator, yes.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I think that concludes our opponent testimony. Is there any other opponent? All right, we're gonna hop to neutral testimony. Neutral testimony, and it needs to be true neutral testimony, not neutral but in favor, or neutral but opposed. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Wayne, members of the committee. My name is Dr. John Massey, John Massey. I'm testifying on behalf of the Nebraska Medical Association in a neutral position on LB 588. I'm a pain physician in the state. I've been practicing for 20 years. I practice pain medicine from Lincoln, Nebraska, all the way into the Panhandle and Scotts Bluff. And as a part of that, I have extensive clinical experience treating substance use disorders as well. We want to thank Senator Wishart for her approach to this bill. The NMA appreciates that she has been receptive to feedback from physicians and incorporated that feedback into LB 588. In 2021, I testified in opposition to Senator Wishart's medical cannabis bill, LB 474. In particular, at that time, our objections included concerns that the bill did not limit the use of medical marijuana to a specific list of qualifying conditions. LB 588 addresses that concern that we made known to Senator Wishart. We share her opinion that she has worked extensively with us to narrow the focus of this bill. This bill enumerates a specific list of qualifying medical conditions. It provides and requires additional continuing medical education for participating practitioners. It requires prescribers to participate and check the PDMP, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, and it requires dispensing providers to check and report to the PDMP as well. These provisions in the bill are significant to ensuring that the patients are treated safely and appropriately for conditions that there is evidence that cannabis can help treat. Evidence is critical to developing sound clinical decisions regarding the use of medical cannabis for effective treatment. And thus far, in a narrow set of circumstances and diseases, there is notable benefit from treatment with cannabis when it is in the appropriate dose. We agree that more research is needed to better understand the effects of additional conditions. The Nebraska Medical Association believes there is currently limited evidence to suggest marijuana and its derivatives may have therapeutic benefits, and that is due to difficulties in studying the multiple compounds associated with cannabis. We share the desire to encourage Congress, federal authorities, the DEA, and the FDA to change cannabis classification from Schedule 1 controlled substance to facilitate that research. Scientifically valid research will help to further develop the cost-benefit ratio of this class of compounds. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Yes.
Senator DeBoer.
Thank you very much for being here, Doctor. I've been sort of hearing some of the medical professionals. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about off-label usage. So the FDA approves a drug, and then doctors have the right to use it for their patients. Are there times when a doctor will choose to use a drug off-label with respect to dosage? So do a dosage different than what's on the FDA approval list?
Absolutely. We've all learned the FDA has limitations in terms of what approved uses are. And a lot of times that's an economic decision where the FDA decides to spend the money required to indicate something as being useful. In pain practice, every day, almost every patient I see, I'm using medications for other than FDA approved indications. We monitor efficacy versus the side effects. Every medication has a spectrum of that, and we have learned how to judge that, and we don't use strictly the FDA indications for those kinds of conditions.
Okay, so you do off-label uses in terms of dosage,
Yes,
off-label uses in terms of maybe the medical condition even?
absolutely.
Okay, so the FDA trials ensure that there's some medical use or efficacy of a drug, and then the individual doctors are the ones that determine what's best for the patient that's in front of them?
In essentially every medication that I can think of, that is the case.
And you've said that there is some medical efficacy for marijuana.
There is.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Anybody else testifying in a neutral capacity? Neutral capacity. Neutral? Come on. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Jennifer Henning, Jennifer Henning. And so as an individual, I'm very neutral on this. I'm very conflicted. 6 years ago, I would have been opposed to this. However, now I have a 6-year-old special needs child, and I want to read an excerpt out of his medical record from his palliative care physician. Connor exhibits a constellation of symptoms: prolonged irritability, flushed and mottled skin, diaphoresis, fevers, in the setting of severe neurological injury, which is consistent with dysautonomia. As such, we aggressively addressing this aspect of his cares with the underlying theme of optimizing meaningful quality of life such that Connor is able to better engage in his home and community. We also discussed potential 5th and 6th lines medications, including methadone and enteral ketamine. Should medical cannabis become an option in Nebraska, we discussed a combination of CBD and THC and potential therapeutics. You see, my son has seizures, but my son also has autism, and my son is extremely self-injurious and aggressive towards others. And what changed my mind is I was knocked out cold by my son with a bloody nose with a slice up into my head, and recognizing at near 3 years old, we have to do something. And we are against all drugs, to be completely honest, and giving it to an innocent and vulnerable little boy. There's a lot of side effects that come with these drugs that they give for seizures, for behaviors, for self-injury. And we were afraid. And the reality is he was on so many medications that we had no idea what was causing side effects. Is this aggression? Is this self-injury coming from the medications that were being given?
They were prescribed by well-meaning psychiatrists, well-meaning family practice. And when we decided his quality of life is affected, some of us are in danger, and recognizing that someday he's going to be a 6'4" grown man. He's nonverbal. He doesn't follow basic commands. We decided we had to change our stance on opening up to different medications. As a parent, we had to look at, is ketamine and methadone more appropriate for a 6-year-old little boy than medical cannabis? Our son's palliative care physician, he's educated, he's experienced, he's empathetic. I wanted to touch on a lot of people telling us to go buy it in a legal state. And what they don't understand is the risk for families like ours. We drive across the state, we buy it in a legal state, we give it to our son. If he's positive on a drug screen, we lose him. If we get caught, if we get pulled over, we automatically go to jail. I already have a criminal record. So guess what happens to me? I lose my children, I go to prison. The reality is there's a lot of risks. And I'm left with 0 tools in the toolbox. And no matter what I feel, no matter what I think, I have to be a voice for my son. And my son needs tools. He needs tools in his toolbox to be able to function. Because when he's 6'4" and a police officer stops him and says, put your hands up, and he can't do it and he gets aggressive, we need tools. We need tools to help him. Because someday he's going to be to a point where we can't help him.
I'll ask you to wrap up. Any questions from the committee? Thank you for being here today. Any other neutral? I don't think so. Neutral? Come on up, Bill. Welcome to your Judiciary Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Wayne, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Bill Hawkins, BILLHAWKINS. I'm with the Nebraska Hemp Company. It's a nonprofit that's been working to reform unjust cannabis laws for a long time. I'm also a lifelong Nebraskan. I come here in a neutral position, and I appreciate the senators listening to this heartfelt testimony. In 2010, we went before the Pharmacy Board and asked for some movement on medical cannabis. In 2014, I ran down Senator Tommy Garrett in the hall and walked with him to his office and got a medical cannabis bill introduced with him. I've worked with Senator Wishart over the years and become best friends with my buddy Will sitting over there. And my biggest desire is to play basketball with him. The young lady who just talked, her son's going to be 6-something. Will is like that, and I've watched him grow up. My dear friend Brooke over here just turned 30 years old. And these people have been in here begging you, this body, to give them this herbal drug. And I think my personal opinion is we made a mistake years ago challenging the medical profession. FDA-approved pharmaceutical drugs is big money, and they don't like a plant coming in and disrupting their big money. In PubMed, if you search PubMed, the last year, 2022, there were 4,500 medical studies on cannabis. Senator Kay, in 2021, there were 4,300. So this plant has been studied. I have Lyme disease, and this bill will not help me. So that is the reason I'm coming in neutral. We should have kept it an herbal plant. And it's too bad that if you research FDA-approved drugs, you will see just the devastation that they have caused. They help people, but I will give you one instance. In the 70s and 80s, estrogen was supplied to women. It took decades and a congressional hearing to get the FDA to admit that it was causing breast cancer in women. So FDA approved isn't always the best. And so I thank you for your time and look at this bill and give us the relief we need. So I would be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Any other neutral testimony? Seeing none, we'll hop back to proponents. Proponents. Go ahead. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Wayne, Vice Chair of the Board. My name is Elizabeth Bronson, ELIZABETH, BRONSON. I'm coming before you in the Judiciary Committee today as a mother of a 5-year-old boy with intractable drug-resistant epilepsy. My home is run by the electric devil that we call epilepsy, and it has altered my family's life forever. I can tell you about the dark side if it is my home. My little boy, Teddy. Teddy had his first seizure at 17 months of age. He was at home and it was absolutely terrifying. My boy was barely breathing. I took him to the hospital that I work at 7 a.m. in the morning via the ambulance. We showed up in the ER bay. It took us 8 hours to get him back to baseline. A month later, we had a genetic diagnosis that equated to his missed developmental milestones. What came after that, 15Q, is an 80% chance of epilepsy. And in that 80%, nearly 80% of those kids are drug resistant. That's my life. My son started with his inpatient EEG. We were counseled to start medication from a neurology team we trusted. 8 weeks later, from that initial EEG, Teddy was diagnosed with infantile spasms. If you look and Google infantile spasms, it is a medical emergency. My son's brain is on fire. We worked through and we've been battling the electric devil since 2019. Teddy's gone through 14 different medications, a diagnosis of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is basically catastrophic epilepsy. We worked through things. We took him and sent him through an MRI machine, a CT scan, all looking for a malformation in his brain. Imagine being a mother praying that your son has a brain malformation that would explain it and make things easier. There was nothing wrong with his brain. It looks fine on an MRI. So we sought out for surgical evaluation because the drugs weren't working. We took him to Denver Children's, Kansas City Mercy, and then out to UCLA for brain surgery. Teddy had a responsive neurostimulator placed in 2021. It got infected. It had to be removed and replaced here at Children's Hospital in Omaha. With reimplantation, he had 1,000 seizure events that first month. I'm coming before you and asking for your time to help me lower his risk of dying every night and to give our family an option because he has a 15-fold risk of every night dying. So I'm asking you, we have a lot of prayers, but I am seeking you guys to make an impact on his life and utilize your elected position for policy change and to tell me to stop keep praying, but to actually move forward in policy change. Sorry, thank you. I welcome any other questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here, man.
Thank you.
Next, proponent. Welcome to your judiciary.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Moeller, Jerrymoller. I'm a retired machinist. I'm also a Vietnam veteran from the U.S. Navy. I'm here today to testify about medical cannabis. The most important thing you need to know and understand about medical cannabis is it actually works. It has been used for medicinal purposes for over 5,000 years. The people would not risk criminal penalties and go out of their way and spend money on something that does not work. By not having any legal access, the state has given total control to the black market. I want to reemphasize that. By not having any state law, you have given 100% control of the cannabis market in Nebraska to the black market. The state has zero control over cannabis right now. There's already a lot of cannabis in Nebraska. The current laws make criminals out of about 20% of the population that are considered regular users. Regular users are daily users. So you have about 400,000 people in Nebraska that use cannabis on a daily basis now. Making criminals out of 400,000 people is not a good public policy. And now the other thing I want to point out is you have two states, Colorado and Missouri, that are completely legal for anyone over 21. So your chances of keeping cannabis out of Nebraska are slim and none. So you've given the state law enforcement an almost impossible task. Now, when you consider what a legal market might look like, I want you to keep in mind that over-regulating and overtaxing a cannabis market simply plays into the hands of the black market and keeps a black market in place like it has in California. The one more very important point I want to make about cannabis is not a toxic substance. You do not become intoxicated when you consume it. Other drugs that we know of that are toxic are aspirin, Tylenol, opioids, alcohol. All those things can kill you. No matter how much cannabis you consume, it will not kill you. So the real question for the state government is this. Does the state government want to control and regulate cannabis market here in Nebraska? Or is it simply going to refer it back to the black market? I don't see that there's a choice one way or the other. You're either going to have one or the other. You're either going to take it and put it in a legal market and control it, or you're going to give it back to the black market and let them do whatever they like because you have no ability to stop it. So I think it's time to be practical and pass some kind of legislation that gives us safe legal access like the other 37 states that already have. And I thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next proponent. Next proponent. Welcome.
My name's JC Todd, JACYTODD. I've done my research on cannabinoids. My wife and I, we own a CBD store in Grand Island, Nebraska, about 3.5 years. And first I want to discuss the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system, and I mentioned, I didn't know about the rule of 10 copies, so.
I can get copies for you.
Okay. So I got two different ones. The endocannabinoid system is the largest receptor system in the human body and regulates the most things in the human body. Here's another one here. Thank you. And regulates most things in the human body. And our doctors know nothing about it, which is a travesty. I mean, the endocannabinoid system consists of CB1, CB2 receptors. And I think we should really, learn about the endocannabinoid system. And that way people with cannabis, it can only be supplemented with a cannabis plant or a cannabis sativa plant, which is a marijuana plant or a hemp plant. There's over 200 different cannabinoids in the plants. Each one has a medicinal value of how it can help out. So again, it's a little crazy that we don't know about that. Another thing, I want to talk about the FDA. The reason why marijuana is not FDA approved is because of the rule LD50. That's a lethal dose amount. Lethal dose amount is how much of this drug will kill you if you take what's the quantity of this drug that will kill you taking it. And if it doesn't have a LD50 amount, a lethal dose amount, it'll never, ever, ever be FDA approved by itself because it's killed 0 people. So I think that's an important factor here that, nobody has died from it, but, and that's the reason why it'll never be FDA approved. And to kind of stay on the federal government side of things, Dr. Fauci, NIH, was doing research on all the cannabinoids back in the late 90s. And there was so much great success that they had off the cannabinoids that their minds were blown away that they took a patent out on it. Patent number 6630507 was issued to the Department of HHS, and it was for all of the cannabinoids. So they had, Dr. Fauci, NIH had the cannabinoids locked up until Donald Trump signed the Hemp Act in 2018. So they knew the great benefits of this, and unfortunately, they kept it from us. So any questions?
Sorry. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. She's making those copies for the committee.
All right, thank you.
Next proponent. Go ahead.
Alrighty, thank you. My name is Morgan Ryan, Morganryan. I am a chronic pain sufferer myself and a disability rights advocate. I was a petitioner for our campaign in 2021 and 2022, which means that I engaged with thousands of Nebraskans on this issue. Again, we collected 196,611 signatures in 2020 and 154,962 in 2022. Politically active voters in every one of your districts, in every single county, have signed these petitions affirming that they want medical cannabis legislation. Polls consistently show medical cannabis with having upwards of 80% support in Nebraska. There seriously aren't many more popular things in this state than letting sick folks have access to a plant as medical treatment. Some people in this body will say that we should wait for the FDA to do something. To be clear, this bill would not interfere with the FDA's process. It would simply protect Nebraskans from being criminalized in our state. If the federal government could solve all of our problems, y'all would be out of jobs. So your constituents, the people you signed up to serve, are suffering right now. People are dying right now. While I was petitioning last summer, I met a man with a terminal illness who said that his doctors wanted to switch him to cannabis when we get this done. They don't have time to wait for the federal government to get their act together. This legislature should be able to do what nearly every other legislature in the nation has done and get out of the way of this legitimate form of healthcare for people who have no better options. 47 other states have had no constitutional issue with these bills. There's no reason to think that Nebraska would be the first. Countless sick and disabled people have literally had to flee our state because of this body's past indifference to their suffering. This is a question of whether their lives are worth anything to you at all. Do you want them to be able to thrive in our state, their state, or not? I have to believe that most of you senators got into this job because you wanted to help people and make a difference. You will find no better, simpler, more popular, or cheaper option to do that than LB 588. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next proponent.
My name is Patricia Peterson, Patricia Petersen. I have traveled across the state gathering petition signatures and speaking with Nebraska citizens for both past petition efforts. I would like to speak to you about some of the patients across the state I have spoken with. I talked with a young man who moved here from Colorado when his wife took a new job in Nebraska. He has epilepsy, and as a medical patient in Colorado, he used cannabis daily to control his seizures. He brought a 6-month supply of his medication with him when they moved. He worries about getting caught, but wasn't going to stop using this plant that changed his life for the better. An elderly woman shared with me that she has arthritis, and her daughter brought her cannabis products. They make her so much more comfortable, but she worries about her daughter breaking the law. At the 2022 Comstock Music Festival, I spoke with a young mother who has a 4-year-old daughter with epilepsy, and they were struggling to find a medication that worked for her. That same day at the festival, I spoke with a elderly Native American woman from Arizona who told me how cannabis gave her back her life. She was a victim of child sexual abuse that continued on through her young adult life. She suffered both physical and mental trauma for so many years and took dozens of different medications that didn't help her or made her life worse. With tears in her eyes, she told me how cannabis helped her heal her mental wounds. The last patient among so many people I spoke with has a very personal connection to me. My youngest daughter has a very good friend who was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma at 24 years old. When she found out I was fighting for a medical cannabis bill, she told me that she used cannabis in her cancer fight and credits it with saving her life. The medications that were prescribed for her nausea were useless as she was unable to keep them down and had no appetite. A friend from Colorado suggested she try using cannabis in her cancer fight, and it was a game changer for her. It addressed her nausea and helped her appetite. She was finally able to eat and give her body the fuel it needed to help her cancer battle. There are so many other stories in our state. We won't be hearing from those people today because they are afraid to come into this building and admit using an illegal plant to improve their health. These patients and so many others are begging the state of Nebraska to listen to them and listen to their stories. I hope you'll do that today. I have one quick addendum. In high school, my former boyfriend was at a party. He was a good Catholic boy who went to Pius. They found him the next morning dead in the backyard of that party from alcohol poisoning. We hear story after story of people dying from alcohol. We can go into a liquor superstore and fill a shopping cart with enough alcohol to kill a frat party. Where's the laws against that? We can buy enough
Ma'am, I have to
cigarettes
have you wrap
to
up.
give everybody lung cancer. Where's the laws against that? Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you for your, Senator Decay.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. You mentioned visiting with an elderly lady that was using cannabis. My question is, was the cannabis helping her condition, or was it just masking the symptoms like a steroid? Or
Her hands were thin. She said she can do things with her hands she was not able to do before. Getting up and down out of a chair was easier. Her arthritis medication caused more problems for her than when her daughter brought her cannabis. It helped her so much. She was seriously worried about her daughter getting caught, bringing her products to help her. But she still used them because they helped.
Well, I understand where she's coming from because I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 19. I used FDA-approved drugs, and I've seen the effects of steroids and the effects of masking rather than helping alleviate the symptoms. I just want to know.
Well, research has shown that cannabis is an anti-inflammatory. And arthritis is a disease of inflammation. So for her, yes, it did help. And she wasn't the only one. Countless stories. Patients are already using it all over the state because they choose it over a medication that doesn't help them as much.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here.
listening to me.
Next proponent.
Good afternoon, members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Shelley Gillen, Shelley Gillen. I am here in support of LB 588 and to once again make a desperate plea on behalf of my son Will and so many others in our state who are innocently suffering. 10 years, that's how long it's been. 10 years of our family being in the trenches of this legislature. 10 years of pleading, begging, crying, testifying at public hearings, writing emails, attending town halls, stopping by senators' offices, interviewing with TV and radio stations, submitting letters to editors of newspapers, visiting with federal legislators, and for the last several years, gathering countless signatures for ballot initiatives. 10 years of continuing to watch Will suffer from hundreds of seizures a day, traumatic injuries from falls, ER visits, hospital stays, and treating him with highly addictive FDA-approved drugs.
10 years of the same redundant arguments and excuses. It's a gateway drug. It's not FDA approved. There aren't enough studies. It's a slippery slope. What about our youth? It will get into the hands of the abuser. It's federally illegal. You should try Epidiolex. Our family finds all of these excuses to be nothing short of insulting. If you are one who has any of these fears or supposed concerns, as well as any others I did not mention, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I will be happy to have a discussion and share facts with you. Our family is also very bewildered by lawmakers who value life at birth, but do not seem to value it now. After all, Will is like an infant. He is completely nonverbal, still in diapers, legally blind, and cognitively about a 2-year-old. And no, will never be able to cast a vote for you or donate to your political aspirations, but he does and always will have value. How much longer do Will and others have to wait? No parent should ever have to beg for medicine for their child, yet here we are. And we will continue to be here as long as it takes for 196,000 Nebraskans to be heard and for you as elected lawmakers to do the right thing. Thank you for your time.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next proponent. Next proponent. Welcome. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator Wayne and the members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Cindy Maxwell Ostick. That's CINDY-MAXWELL-OSTDIEK. I'm a mother and a small business owner and a volunteer, and I'm a co-founder of the Nebraska Legislative Study Group. I want to thank you for holding this hearing open today for everyone who came to testify. It's unfortunate it's not always been in the case in other committees throughout this session. I'm not an expert on medical cannabis, but I spoke to thousands of neighbors in West Omaha's Legislative District 4 when I ran this last year during the election. As an independent, I talked with voters from all parties and backgrounds, and I carry so many of those stories on my heart. I wanted to specifically share about 2 gentlemen briefly. Many veterans spoke in favor of medical cannabis when they talked with me, but one in particular talked about his pride serving his country. He felt strongly about following the law, and he was so disappointed Nebraska's elected officials had not addressed this important medical need for his PTSD. I think of another neighbor often when I drive by his house. He's got a garden, he has decorations and window chimes by his front door, and they signify breast cancer awareness. He's a widower, and he was distraught, talking with me and telling me the story about how his wife struggled without medical cannabis while she battled cancer. He hoped no one else's loved ones would endure the pain that she did. These are only 2 of many very emotional pleas I heard from my neighbors, and Nebraskans have been asking for this important legislation for many years now. I want to thank Senator Wishart for her perseverance to bring this bill and all the co-signers, and I ask you to please vote yes and help these neighbors that have these medical needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Next proponent. Seeing no more, we have received 56 letters, 48 in support, 7 in opposition, 1 in neutral position. Also, this new session, the legislature has established the ADA accommodation for public hearing, written testimony for qualified individuals. And for the record, we have received 4 ADA accommodation written testimonies. Testifiers are Leah Post, Liapost, Lacey Smith, LACYSMITH, Ellen Lennox Smith, ELLENLENOXSMITH, and Colton Eggers maybe, COLTONEGGERS. And with that, Senator Wishart, you are elected to close. Go ahead.
Thank you. I will be very quick. I realize I'm all that is between you and lunch before your next hearings this afternoon. Couple of things I wanted to point out. I do encourage you to read the summary, and I'm happy to sit down with each one of you and go through this. You know, there's been talks about other states like California. This legislation is absolutely nothing like the laws that are in California or some other states. It is a very, very tightly created medical cannabis system with very few producers and processors and stores at which cannabis would be sold. So I'm happy to go through all those details with you and how we've set up a system where you track from seed to sale the cannabis to ensure quality and efficacy. The last thing I would say is that I was in the legislature when we passed legislation called Right to Try. It was legislation brought by Senator Hilkeman, and it was to support the ability for Nebraskans to utilize drugs that were not yet FDA approved. And that bill passed almost unanimously. This is a right to try piece of legislation for a very, very limited group of individuals that you've seen listed in this legislation to have the chance to work with a doctor to be able to see whether cannabis can support them as it has shown evidence to support other individuals that have similar medical conditions. So I do want to push back a little bit on some of the comments that were made today, that as a legislature, we have not done similar types of legislation. I look at that piece of legislation and I see a lot of similarities with what we're looking at today. Thank you.
With that, is there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for being here today. And with that, that'll close the hearing on LB 588 and this morning's hearings.